Whammo. Okay.
How are you,
Well,
Mike? You don't
I'm
know who
good.
I am, do you?
Uh, you know what? I know of you enough to have sent you an inquiry, but I'll admit I couldn't give a meaningful biography of you.
No worries, no worries. So first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me. I'm Pisco Liddy. I'm an attorney. I like comment on legal stuff and political stuff. Definitely like pro-Democrat side, like more left-wing coded. You and I think we have some differences of opinion, but I really appreciate oftentimes that you're an iconoclast and you'll have these kinds of takes that I don't think you're just taking to be a contrarian. But every now and then there'll be something that I see on my feed from you that I'm like, wow, that's like, really well said, or it's like, I didn't expect this. And so on this Epstein stuff, I've been listening to you constantly in different places you've been going. I really want to pick your brain on sort of where you are right now. And I had a couple questions and also wanted to expose your arguments to my audience. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay.
And yeah, why don't you tell me, I'm sure my audience knows who you are, but why don't you give a little intro?
Well, I very much appreciate you drawing a critical but underappreciated distinction between iconoclast and contrarian. Not that I necessarily deliberately act in such a way to present myself as an iconoclast or that I would self identify with that, but it's much more amenable than contrarian, which I've been accused of over the years constantly on a whole wide variety of issues, which to me always has a connotation of arbitrariness, like you've simply selected a position to take or a point to argue for no other reason than you want to provoke a reaction or instigate or be just reflexively contrarian to something. It couldn't possibly be the product of your authentic reasoning, for better or worse, whether or not one agrees with it. But it seems like there's nothing I can do to shake the contrarian label. So I do celebrate your ability
Yeah.
to distinguish. I think I've been aware of you tangentially, peripherally. Last time I'm aware of us having been in contact was you invited me to appear on some stream with Destiny, which I would have gladly done. And I had been on with him before several years ago, but it didn't pan out for whatever reason. And then I think, if memory serves,
I
you
might have
had
reply guide
tentatively,
you on Ukraine or something like
yeah,
that.
you
I
had
might have.
wanted to maybe do some debate on or the Trump prosecutions
Oh,
during the
that's right. Yeah.
interregnum period, or maybe Ukraine. So yeah, but my impression was that you're more of like a stalwart. Is it fair to say partisan Democrat than I am?
I would say
And
partisan Democrat, certainly more than you. Yep.
okay, and which it makes it all the more interesting that we seem to have this convergence on Epstein. It wouldn't be the first time, as I mentioned to you before, earlier today. I was invited to go on Ben Shapiro's show
Shapiro.
talking about this. So you never know, strange bedfellows, etc.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally odd the way that certain people have arrayed themselves in this discussion where strange bedfellows for you, Dersh and Ben Shapiro, certainly not something that people might expect given your views on foreign intervention, given your views on Israel. And so I do appreciate, and also your appearance on Breaking Points as well, where I think on Breaking Points, once again, probably aligned, and I think that you probably do respect Crystal Ball and Sagar and a lot of what they're doing in Breaking Points.
Yeah, I've been a
And
guest on like various
yeah,
iterations of their show for years now. So of course.
yeah, no. So awesome. Why don't you first, for my audience, give us a rundown of your take, as it were, and also I do want you to mention the kind of backlash that you've been getting, because it's not just been kind of on the merits. I've seen you in certain Twitter spaces. I've seen you in like I said, in these interviews, but the response has been quite vitriolic to you. So I want you to touch on your actual take, but also the response and the accusations that because you have this take, you are not just a pedophile defender, but are yourself a pedophile, or or you're involved in some kind of sex crime yourself. So why don't you give us your take and then the reaction and what your sort of your impression has been of the response?
Gee, vitriol being spewed at me on the internet? I can't imagine. Yes, there has been much vitriolic reaction to my take, let's say, on Epstein, but I guess because my brain is wired in a certain way at this point, or I'm numb to the online backlash, it doesn't have quite the same effect on me that it could very reasonably have on others. Like, I'm not promoting my seeming immunity to online vitriol as something that any normal person should try to emulate. Like, if you have normal emotions and a normal emotional processing and normal, like, awareness of oneself and one's relationship with
Relationships
others,
and
yeah,
friends.
you probably shouldn't be habituated into finding it totally unremarkable that you'll just be inundated with deluges of people every day claiming that you are the worst possible things in the universe.
Mhm.
So I'm a major outlier in that respect. But yes, I mean, and I think it does get to why I find the popular discussion around this matter to be so flawed, which is that if anyone does deign to take a more critical perspective on various aspects of it, that's what you're going to be subjected to. People accusing you either outright or insinuating that you could only be questioning the veracity of prongs of the narrative because you yourself are implicated in either Epstein's child sex trafficking ring or purported child sex trafficking ring, or you have some like shameful
Intelligence
past that you're
connection
trying.
or yeah.
Oh yeah, that's another one. I'm now being widely accused of having been compromised by Israel, which is hilarious. That will be news to Israel, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
certainly. You just mentioned the narrative. And you use this a lot, and I understand what you mean by the narrative. And I actually agree with what your quote unquote narrative is. It maybe comes in different strands for specifically Epstein in terms of whether it's, the left narrative or the right narrative. But could you broadly like just clarify what you mean by the narrative and what you're questioning?
yeah, so I think to distill what narrative it is that I'm questioning, it would be the narrative, which I guess is more predominantly right coded, but is, I would argue, probably seeping more and more into the left, if only for reasons of partisan polarization against Trump. And you did see a lot of it, I think, when Epstein was first indicted and imprisoned in 2019. There was a more visible left wing variant as well that kind of merged eventually with the right, and then with Trump out of power, it was more predominantly right wing coded, and now it's another mixture. So here's how I would characterize that narrative. The narrative is that's what being covered up and what made people so incensed when the FBI and DOJ put out that now infamous memo on the Sunday night of 4th of July weekend, claiming that after a thorough investigation, they found no Epstein quote unquote client list, no evidence that
Exhaustive.
exhaustive,
Yeah.
no evidence that could serve as a predicate to charge any additional third party individuals. And uh, on top of that, it said that unfounded conspiracies or speculation around this issue do not serve the interests of anyone. That was basically the thrust of it. And people were so incensed and outraged and up in arms, and it created such a firestorm that is still growing by the day, it seems, because people believe that obviously there must be this rampant child sex trafficking operation enforced by blackmail in which Epstein and or his co-conspirators entrapped or enticed prominent third-party individuals like politicians, business leaders, academics, celebrities, etc. He cajoled them into joining his into entering his orbit so that he could surreptitiously film them in illicit sexual encounters with minors and then use that as blackmail against them. And now, lo and behold, Trump is now party to the very cover up that a lot of his supporters wanted to vote him into office to uncover. And that, I think, that's basically why people are so animated by this issue, right? And I think for a variety of reasons, it's just so groundless, or it is not nearly, it's not anywhere close to being as established enough as people seem to just intuitively believe for a variety of reasons that we could get into. And so that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And a lot of my assessments of this kind of flow from that premise.
But let's just be clear about your position here. Your position isn't that this kind of thing would be impossible, that you could definitively debunk it. You're basically raising an issue of some kind of threshold of burden of proof that
Yeah.
The facts as we currently know them don't establish the kind of claims that people are making, the narrative. And I do agree that that is the narrative. And not only do I think it's the narrative, I think it's an essential conspiratorial mythology to at least MAGA in the run up to 2024, kind of an offshoot of QAnon or the kind of ambient feeling among a lot of right wingers in the aftermath, maybe, I don't know, of the Great Recession, that pedophiles, satanic pedophiles, run either the world or the country or something. And so you're not saying that it strikes you as totally impossible for this stuff to happen. You're just raising the burden of proof argument to what is, I think, a central core mythology.
Well, I mean, you can't strictly say that it's impossible that an asteroid could hit Earth tomorrow. Right. You can't say it's impossible that that dinosaurs roam the Earth amongst the humans and there's a lost civilization of Atlantis and so forth. I mean, maybe there is slightly more of a concrete factual basis for what people think about Epstein, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? And my point is that there is a hugely voluminous wealth of material that's been promulgated in public over the past 10, 15 years on this issue through civil litigation, through criminal action, through journalistic reporting, and none of it adds up to anything close to a reasonable surmise that the crux of this issue actually is a wide-scale pedophilic sex trafficking ring that's enforced by blackmail. And it's not just that even though that's, I guess, how I would distill my core premise into like a pithy sentence or two, I do also think that there are downstream negative effects of the widespread belief in that thesis that, among other things, injure civil liberties, cause people to just be generally crazed and misdiagnose political problems in favor of their latching on to this titillating, scandalizing belief system that to them is most explanatory of how society is governed. And so I think that's a problem. I think it's made people particularly sort of blinkered around Israel, where I do obviously have many critiques that I've made over and over again incessantly about Israel and U.S. foreign policy in relation to Israel, not just since October 7th of 2023, but going back decades for as long as I've really been in the popular eye or involved in political and journalistic discussion. And I find people kind of beclowning themselves when they get so fixated on like sexual blackmail as the Rosetta Stone for understanding the nature of the U.S. relationship with Israel. So lots of downstream negative effects that I think have not gotten proper examination. And yes, it all does flow from my, I guess, original contention here, which is that the thing that people so ardently seem to believe exists really is not backed up by anything close to credible facts or evidence.
Right. You tell me to what extent you agree or disagree with the following or the components to your argument. So I think number one, you're just seeing a lack of smoking gun proof that would, so number one, it's just like the dearth of evidence that would cleanly establish the kind of claims. So for example, the lack of one additional third party that's implicated other than Maxwell and Epstein themselves. The lack of credibility of some of the witnesses. I think you've harped on Virginia, I can't pronounce her name, Giuffre, right? Specifically. And also some of the reporting of it seems weird evidence, either based on kind of like hearsay or like I heard from them that said this. This is with respect to like a statement allegedly made by Alex Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney in Florida and gave this sweetheart deal to to Epstein initially in his original criminal case, and maybe some other reporting for some other sort of accusations not exactly panning out. So in general, would you agree with like the characterization of what I'm saying here, like dearth of evidence, lack of credibility in witnesses? What other big components do you see as like problematic of the story?
Financial incentives, which obviously have warped, in terms of what my assessment is, the emergence of a lot of the accusations that people have latched onto that they see as dispositive for their theories.
Of the people peddling it, were you saying financial motivation and like basically a bias of the people who are pushing the narrative?
Yeah, the lawyers who have made a killing on litigating this issue, whether in a civil context or perhaps even in a criminal context, and the massive payouts that their clients have received, and how those clients have every incentive to, let's say, dramatize or exaggerate their claim so as to ensure that they will receive the most possible money from the myriad funds that have been established to disperse hundreds of millions of dollars to anybody who can claim to have even the most tangential um, claim of victimization by Epstein and or Maxwell. And it's not just, I guess I would say it's not just that there's a lack of a smoking gun. It's that there's a huge body of countervailing evidence that cuts squarely against what people purport to believe here, and the central tenets that seem to undergird their views of this issue. I guess, and I'll just say that the more that I examine many different features of this story, and I kind of had already incrementally in fits and starts for the preceding, like, I don't know, 10 years or so. But as I've done this deeper and deeper dive, especially over the past few weeks, I'm more and more confident in my position. And I'd be open to evidence that would be contrary to my position if it were made available to me, which it generally hasn't been. In terms of countervailing evidence, well, there's a lot. And it depends on what aspect you'd like to focus on. In terms of the intelligence component, which I think is a big reason why this like podcaster guy clique and people in the alt media and so forth are so exercised about
David, Tucker Carlson, these kinds of people.
Yeah, more or less. I think it really says a lot. I mean, even people constantly tell me to read this person, Whitney Webb's book. And I've been aware of Whitney Webb for a while. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Here and there, I found her to maybe be able to do some decently useful research. But when it comes to generating a coherent thesis, I don't see any thesis at all in this book that people are constantly commanding me to read. It's called One Nation Under Blackmail. It's really just a whole potpourri of disparate information that people, I guess, believe in totality adds up to this unshakable conclusion that obviously Epstein was an intelligence asset, and that's why X, Y, and Z happened with him over the course of this entire saga. But like, there's no causal connection even remotely established over the course of these 900 plus, like, I'm sorry to say, pretty unreadable pages. And I'm not going to claim to have read all of it, but I did read some of it. And if you look at literally the very first page, she basically seems to predicate her whole motivation for writing this vast tome about blackmail supposedly being like the central variable and organizing principle of contemporary American society and also like American history, by amplifying this quote that is almost recited like as an article of faith or like a religious incantation by these people who I've been taken to calling as Epstein mythologists, which is that Alex Acosta said that he was told that Epstein, quote unquote, belonged to intelligence, and Acosta should therefore, quote, leave it alone. And that explains
already
why.
Two levels of hearsay. Already two levels of hearsay. In that it's Alex heard from someone else who said, and it's in a actual someone is saying that Alex heard. Yeah,
I think it could be triple hearsay.
Yeah,
because it's a form. If this is 2019, according to Vicky Ward's Daily Beast article, this is a former senior Trump administration official telling her 2 years before that, 2 or 3 years before that, that sorry, I have these weird things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
pop
I
up.
don't
I
know
don't know how
why.
to
Yeah.
disable. 2 years before that, that he understood Acosta to have said this to Trump transition official.
That Acosta had heard. So that's the triple level.
No,
the
that
first
the
level is
senior official, not Acosta, some other senior
but the
official.
senior official heard that Acosta said that someone else said that he was intelligence.
He heard that. Yeah, okay, let's see if we can get this right. That it's Vicky Ward saying that she was told by a senior administration official that he was told that 2 or 3 years before that, Acosta said this to unnamed Trump transition officials. So, like, what level of hearsay are we at there? I'm not exactly sure, but I really don't think that would be admissible in court. Maybe you can give me your legal opinion.
Yeah, no. I think you have to have some kind of hearsay exception for all three levels. Yeah, but no.
And I think it's almost certain that the quote unquote former senior administration official that she's referring to there as her source was Steve Bannon, who is just, who has a very well established proclivity to just spout
spewing bullshit,
speculative gossip to whomever will listen, except as it turns out on the issue of whether he will ever publish the 15 plus hours of interview footage with Epstein that he has. But I've been over that quite a bit. And so you have that premise that Whitney Webb says basically was her inspiration for delving so deeply into this story, that she cites on like the first page of her book as like this almost thesis style statement. And she apparently, and I sent her a message about this, I never got a reply. She apparently never examined the provenance of that quote, such that it might have occurred to her to add like a qualifier or two so people know that this wasn't just Acosta making an on-record declaratory statement that everybody can have total confidence is
the official statement of Alex Acosta,
unabashedly accurate. Yeah. And then she doesn't seem to mention anywhere, despite her book having come out in 2022, that there was a 2020 Office of Professional Responsibility report.
That's in the DOJ. That's a component of the DOJ. Yep.
Where Acosta is asked under oath, under penalty of perjury, did you have any knowledge of Epstein belonging to intelligence, and did that guide in any way how you managed the formulation of that non-prosecution agreement in 2007, 2008? And he says absolutely directly, the answer is no. So if you're going to constantly fling out the first triple hearsay quote to substantiate your argument, but not even mention ever or even be aware of the contradictory evidence, then I question like the whole basis on which you're approaching this issue, which seems just like confirmation bias gone completely haywire. And so that's one aspect here. We can talk about that more if you want, but there's also, I think, just incredibly gaping credibility problems with just some of the core tenets of the allegations that have been made by purported victims, and that I think the media or people just who are discussing this do not want to reckon with, because number one, you can't question any victim. That's sort of like a Me Too tenet that the right really now has embraced.
Ignores is kind of your observation, just for the people, is that the right conveniently ignores their skepticism of Me Too and this whole victim sympathy. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so the right in the main will evince skepticism of Me Too just as a cultural and political construct, right? But in certain circumstances where they see it as advantageous to their interests in whatever way, they kind of disregard that skepticism and buy into the whole mentality where it's totally verboten to ever scrutinize or criticize a purported victim. And if
like
you do
Joe
that,
Biden's accuser as well, by the way.
Yeah, which I also got a tsunami of pushback for.
When you questioned?
Well, not just questioning. I was one of the few people who did like a long investigation of her in May and June of 2020, and showed that, among other things, like, somebody told me on the record that she had attempted to plant fake corroboration with this person, so that when journalists would be referred to talk to this other person as a supposed corroborating witness, that she would be seen to be corroborating "quote unquote" Tara Reid's story. That's not her real name. And other things that just showed that she was lacking in total credibility. I mean, people can go search Michael Tracy, Tara Reid, Spectator 2020 if you want to read that. But yeah, people were enraged at me about that. And I don't know, have you heard from anybody recently who's saying, "Oh, Tara Reid was a totally unimpeachable victim"? I haven't heard that much lately.
I'm not hearing that, but I want to insulate you real quick on some stuff. There is something I want to, some stuff later on that I'm definitely going to push a little bit on, but I just want to make sure that the audience understands. So, number one, you agree that Epstein was guilty of certain crimes, correct?
Well, he pleaded guilty in Florida.
Right. And it's, you think that the evidence suggests that he was involved in trafficking of minors to himself at a bare minimum, that you think that there is something criminal that happened here. You just don't have evidence that it goes beyond Epstein and Maxwell.
Well, trafficking is a weird construct. Like, trafficking has been radically expanded to encompass a whole array of activity under the banner of essentially a conspiracy. And as I'm sure you probably know, prosecutors love nothing more than conspiracy law, because
it's easy to, it's an easier charge. You just need a meeting of the minds and some overt acts, and yeah,
it's easy to rope a whole constellation of actors in under the umbrella of a quote unquote conspiracy without necessarily having to prove the elements of a particularized crime. Right.
Put aside like the Mann Act, put aside the trafficking stuff. You think that Epstein had sex with minors, right?
Well, yeah. So I think that there is evidence that he obviously sought to procure the youngest possible females for his own gratification by enlisting them to take part in sexualized massages. And even if it's the case, as I think is also pretty clear, that in the Florida prosecution, a bunch of the young women or minor teenagers, let's say, who ended up providing Epstein with a sexualized massage, even if they lied about their age to him, which Julie Brown, like the woman who wrote the Miami Herald series, she writes in her book that one of the initial victims, who, and I'm saying purported victims or claimed victims because I don't like to necessarily credit, as people do, that a self-identified victim is therefore necessarily a victim if their claims have never been tested, really, because I think that's a violation of due process. But
you think the violation of due process for you to identify someone as a victim without them going through a court?
Well, definitely in a formal legal setting, it's a violation.
Okay, sure.
Maybe more colloquially, it's not quite the same kind of violation, but still, I'm sort of inclined not to necessarily just use that terminology with total credulity. But one of the initial people who sort of launched the whole investigation against Epstein by the Palm Beach police later recanted that she had had any sexual interaction with Epstein. And also, according to Julie Brown, she was encouraged by another person that quote unquote trafficked this other victim, like another teenage girl, essentially, who was a little bit older, quote unquote trafficked this younger teenage girl to Epstein, with the idea that if she goes and gives this older rich guy a massage and there could be some sexual component, they would get like $200 or $300 in cash, and then they can go to the mall afterwards. One of those original victims, Julie Brown says, was told to lie to Epstein and say she was 18, and then did in fact lie to Epstein when he asked her age and told him that she was 18. Now, does the fact that a 14-year-old or 15-year-old perhaps lied about their age so they could to Epstein so they could give him a sexualized massage, whatever degree of sexualization we're talking about? No, that does not absolve Epstein, because, by the letter of the law, particularly in Florida, it's no excuse or no defense to say that I was unaware that this person was not 18 as she claimed. Like, Epstein could still been prosecuted. So do I doubt that when Epstein was indicted and arrested again in July of 2019, that the government could have eventually convicted him of some crimes? No, I don't have a huge doubt about that. Although it would have been
But do you
interesting
think
to
that he
see.
did that
Oops,
shit,
sorry, I just.
Michael?
Uh,
I mean, on
well, let me
balance,
just finish the
everything
point.
you know. Yeah,
It
sure, sure.
seems very plausible that the government could have eventually convicted Epstein because they were able to convict Maxwell on much more tenuous grounds. So yeah, they probably would have had ample material to potentially convict Epstein.
But whether a court would find that, I think is a separate question and a bit of a dodge than whether you think, based on your looking at the evidence, which I think, by the way, I think you're one of the people, unlike a lot of other journalists, who's actually diving in
Yeah.
to these cases. And so I do appreciate that. But on balance, you think he probably did something criminal? You, not whether or not you think a court would find it.
I think he definitely did something untoward and unseemly and objectionable. Like even if somebody was 18-year-olds, even if there was an 18-year-old girl who got involved in this thing where at her high school there were a bunch of other 18-year-old girls or people in her age range, let's say from I don't know 15 to 19, who decide amongst themselves that it was easy cash to go and provide these sexualized massages to this older guy in Palm Beach. I could imagine any father who's sane telling his daughter whether she was 18 or 17, meaning whether above or below the legal age of consent, that she better not do that because it would be terrible in a whole variety of ways. So, yeah, I do think that there's clear evidence that he did something untoward. I think there's clear evidence he did something illegal insofar as pursuant to the non-prosecution agreement, he admitted that there was a 17-year-old with whom he had that he had procured for prostitution. So that's not legal. Sure.
Okay, then I appreciate that.
But when
So
we get to trafficking, I just think trafficking can be so nebulous, and you have to prove like elements where there's some kind of coercion that kind of can be like retrofitted after the fact. And a lot of these supposed victims were full-fledged adult women in their 20s who were engaged in like escort type behavior or sugar daddy type behavior, and then got involved with Epstein and then later claimed that they were trafficked when the floodgates opened for civil settlement. So I'm not sure how much I would necessarily credit those claims. But in terms of
but that's on a
Epstein's moral
categorical
guilt,
basis, right?
yes, I think
Okay.
it's morally objectionable to have done what he did in terms of his procurement of the youngest possible females for his own gratification. And I do think that in legal terms, he himself admitted that there was criminal culpability, and I think the government wouldn't have had a hard time proving that probably once again in the second round.
Got it. I take it you have a categorical position, kind of being skeptical of some of these trafficking statutes and how much you're able
Yes.
to, the government is able to like put people on notice to reasonably guide their actions and to really delineate what is being prescribed. Fair.
Yeah. I mean, one of the statutes under which Maxwell was charged was the you may know the full title of the statute, but it was the trafficking
Section 15.
victims. So it's trafficking victims. I can't remember now, but it was only signed into law in the year 2000, after like a decade of cross ideological NGO advocacy around this issue, and was spearhead, was championed by the Bush administration through like a weird, signed by Clinton, but then also championed by the George W. Bush administration through this weird coalition of like evangelical Christians and also feminists who wanted to empower prosecutors to more aggressively go after the traffickers more than the, let's say, prostitutes or people who had been previously described as prostitutes, or women who might be technically committing a crime if they engage in sexual acts in exchange for compensation. But the real culprits, these people would have argued, were the quote unquote traffickers, and therefore additional powers were needed for the government to prosecute them. And it's just like, okay, so really only in the year 2000 was it realized that like the child sex trafficking as we know it today would have been a criminal offense. It just seems like there's a lot of there's like a structure that's been built up around this whole trafficking concept that I think is really far afield from what anybody could agree would be actual criminal or deplorable conduct committed against children, like child rape, like bona fide child rape could be easily criminalized without branching it out into these, I think, much more amorphous legal concepts that get misused and are used to basically subsidize this whole NGO complex and also provide an incentive for these weird trafficking stories to get exaggerated and fictionalized or made into like movies and create a whole narrative that engenders a lot of public hysteria and paranoia. So yeah, I am a skeptic of that whole conceit, I think.
Though regardless of your skepticism, I've heard you say, and let me just make sure that I understand you, you are in favor, as supposedly Alan Dershowitz is, although I have something to say about that, of transparency. So there are people who are saying, for example, in my chat right now, then why not release the files and why not release the files? I've heard you say that you're in favor of releasing full transparency. So nothing about your position with respect to trafficking statutes in general, your classification of these people as purported victims, because of your position on, I guess, the due process standard should be read to indicate that you don't want this information to be released. Is that fair?
Exactly. And I've been unambiguous about this. I am in favor of maximum possible disclosure. I'm almost always in favor of maximum possible disclosure when it comes to records that are in the possession of the government that they don't want to release. Like I'm constantly, like I have right now many pending FOIA requests that the government tries to stifle because they don't want to release the records. The government over classifies and conceals way too much information. And as a journalist, and maybe even you as a lawyer, you should be well familiar with that. And that would also apply here. I just think people maybe have a little bit of a misunderstanding as to why so many materials do continue to be concealed in relation to the Epstein matter, which is because judges and the DOJ have to abide by a whole host of statutes that protects identifying information around purported victims. And also judges can employ their own discretion to maximize the amount of privacy that they're affording purported victims. And if a lot of that material did come out, it might not reflect particularly well on the veracity of so many of these purported victims.
On that point, in terms of the disclosure stuff, I agree it's ridiculous, and it's not just a federal issue. States have FOIA analogs, and oftentimes it's the same issue. Like you're trying to get, New Jersey. It's absolutely insane. So I do agree, even though I agree with the concept of classified information. For example, I think that people often conflate some First Amendment issues with Julian Assange, where I don't think there's a First Amendment issue at all there with respect to.
Well, I disagree with that, but we don't have to get.
I know we don't have to. I know, but I do agree generally that there's notwithstanding the fact that I agree with the concept of classification and national defense information, all that stuff. That there is an overclassification issue and there is like a withholding of stuff, even when it doesn't even make sense to withhold it. So on that, I think I agree. I want to touch a little bit before I push a little bit on other points, because this has been fascinating for me. The Dershowitz thing. So I accept, right? Like Dersh makes an argument that he was vindicated by the fact that they had this settlement with Guay, and that this vindicates him because I think she said that she might have confused him. So I don't think that's
she may have misidentified him. That's how the joint statement that they released pursuant to that settlement was worded.
So there are a couple of things, and I wanted to push you on this for a little bit for Dersh, because you've been. I know you don't typically associate yourself favorably with Dersh in terms of his other political opinions, but you have been like accepting some of his arguments, or at least aligning yourself on this particular issue.
It's not that I accept his argument.
Yeah,
it's that I've done my own independent evaluation, and it happens to align with his argument.
Right. So this is me being an opportunist and just poking you a little bit. So the first is Dersh on saying pure vindication. It's not a pure vindication, right? I mean, it's a settlement, and she could have come to it for a bunch of reasons, and she's not officially retracting her accusation, is she?
Come on. She's admitting that.
I'm just asking you. So she's not retracting.
Let's just review for a second, okay? Guay, through her lawyer Bradley Edwards at the time, who was like one of the big extortionist ringleaders on all these settlements, and then Guay later also gets tied in with David Boies, who became like an arch nemesis of Dershowitz
Yep.
legally. Um,
Who, by the way,
so
who's head of a major law firm in the country, major white shoe law firm. But yeah, go ahead.
So Virginia Giuffre. So what happened? The sequence is that Virginia Giuffre, through her lawyer Bradley Edwards, filed a motion for joinder to ongoing litigation around the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which some self-identified victims were claiming had been violated in relation to the 2007-2008 non-prosecution agreement, because the claim was that they hadn't been properly notified that there was a plea agreement in the offing. Now, whether there was actually any obligation to notify them, I still find to be ambiguous. The courts did rule on this eventually in 2019, but at the time of this agreement actually being finalized in 2007, 2008, I don't think there's a whole lot of evidence that there was any affirmative obligation on the part of the government to notify victims as they claimed, and as like the cultural sort of drumbeat insisted that they must be right about. But we'll leave that aside. Giuffre tried to join that litigation, and when she filed that motion for joinder, she's the one who introduced these sweeping, salacious, incredible claims around a wide scale child sex trafficking ring, because she was the first one to claim that she had been trafficked as a minor to two named individuals, specifically, meaning Dershowitz and Prince Andrew. We can talk about Prince Andrew too, who did settle in a different way than with a financial settlement, whereas Dershowitz did not. And then she also vaguely, and I don't understand how this didn't result in sanctions for the lawyers, or I think they might have actually in part resulted in sanctions. I have to go back and double check, but they just had her randomly claim that she had been trafficked to a category of unnamed prominent individuals like foreign prime ministers and presidents, and without making a specific allegation. And then, but Dershowitz right away, immediately when this became public, which I think was January of 2015, vehemently denied these claims, said he would waive any right to privacy in order to prove them in terms of what could be disclosed. He actually invited the FBI to investigate, and if necessary, to initiate a prosecution against him so he could be vindicated. And he called Virginia Giuffre a liar because he said, I have never met this person, and I certainly have never engaged in any sexual activity with this person, because the only person he's ever engaged in sexual activity with in that time frame would have been his wife. And then Virginia Giuffre and David Boies sued Dershowitz for defamation. Dershowitz countersues. And then, there's years of incredibly intensive, brutal litigation, discovery, every possible sort of twist and turn under the sun. And then eventually, after all this time, effort by David Boies to substantiate via Giuffre's claims against Dershowitz, one of the core prongs of this whole child sex trafficking theory, eventually David Boies has to essentially humiliate himself by acceding to his client, saying she may have misidentified someone that she previously had claimed for nearly a decade she had been sex trafficked to as a minor on at least 6 or 7 occasions. Really? You may have misidentified someone that you claim committed, I guess, rape against you on at least 6 or 7 occasions? So yeah, they figured out a way to word it so that it wouldn't have been like a total humiliation to like the general public when they just read about it or read an excerpt of it. But it was an admission that this accusation had been false.
Do you find anything inconsistent about
I don't know what would be a vindication for Dershowitz if done that. He didn't even seek any monetary damages. He always disclaimed that. All he wanted was the admission from the accuser that the accusations were false, and he received
which he didn't receive. You agree, literally, he did not receive that, correct?
If we want to be hyper literal about reading the wording of that statement that she may have misidentified him, then sure. But
okay,
come on.
That's all. For
all practical purposes, it was an admission that the allegation had been false, right?
I think in general, it's probably it lends to the argument that the claim probably wasn't substantiated. I think if it was, they would have pushed it even further. I think that's one of the points, by the way, that like Ezra Klein makes, is one of the reasons why I'm skeptical of the biggest version of this conspiracy, is because there have been a lot of high profile law firms, lawyers, journalists, right, poking around in this. And so
Exactly.
I'm not, so I understand that point. Although I will note, and I'll give you an opportunity, do you find anything inconsistent about your position in interpreting this settlement as a vindication for Dershowitz and not interpreting the settlement with monetary settlement with Prince Andrew as a vindication for Guay?
Well, I don't claim that in the same way the Prince Andrew settlement vindicates my position here, or proves Guay to be a serial fabulist. I think that the Dershowitz settlement, among other things, proves Guay to be a serial fabulist. I would just point to mitigating or complicating factors that gave rise to the Prince Andrew settlement that should therefore not be that would make it so that the settlement should not be read to obviously validate
in the way that Dershowitz one would.
In the way that the Dershowitz one would, exactly, because Guay finally filed her lawsuit against Prince Andrew during the period when New York State enacted a incredibly constitutionally dubious statute that I can't believe was never properly challenged in the courts, where they were going to say, look, we're going to, and I know that's, the civil context different from the criminal context, obviously, but they claimed, look, we're going to just temporarily hold the statute of limitations in abeyance and allow anybody to just like come out from the woodworks and file a claim for monetary damages for sexually assaultive or sexually harassing, sexually abusive conduct from like decades ago. We're going to give you the special like Me Too year and a half window or something. And then you could sue whomever you want, no matter how long ago these alleged actions were. And so that's the window in which Virginia Giuffre sued Prince Andrew. And I just find that the decision on the part of Andrew to settle after he had, up until the point that he settled, he and his counsel had adamantly denied virtually every aspect or every fact claim made by Giuffre and boys that would have implicated Andrew in some kind of illicit or illegal sexual act. And then they did come to a settlement. Well, what was the context in which they came to a settlement? It was
Queen's Jubilee, or
the Queen's Jubilee year, right? His mother was like 95 years old. She was like months away from death. She had this final 70-year anniversary celebration for her reign as head of state in the United Kingdom. Is Prince Andrew is the royal family going to acquiesce to Prince Andrew going to the United States to stand trial and enduring this incredible maelstrom of like hugely embarrassing publicity? No, I think the logic whereby Andrew settled is pretty clear, and he also admitted no liability or fault, and so I don't classify that settlement as discrediting of Giuffre in the way that the Dershowitz one does, or that other confabulations of Giuffre do. But I think people want to overread or overinterpret it as probative of Giuffre's credibility, when I don't particularly think it is. I mean, just look at what she did with the settlement money. She got $10 million for her own damages, and with, of course, Boys and Edwards and these people all getting a huge cut. So they
got a cut, yeah.
So that like Epstein is basically subsidized like the New York and South Florida bar associations. And
you say that, but like
okay, that's a deliberate exaggeration.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way: a lot of lawyers have made a lot of money suing Epstein-related entities.
I get it that for most people this is a lot of money, but in the context of big law firms, it's not that
okay.
Much
Maybe so. Maybe so. Yeah. Well, Bradley Edwards was not, I don't think, a big law partner or anything.
Yeah, and that may be different in terms of, and I do, by the way, think not just in this context, that the realities of litigation, people oftentimes I think a similar thing with like the CBS lawsuit where they settled, where CNN is settling these kinds of things. They don't always determine on underlying liability. There are a lot of realities of the economics of litigation that would, including, as you mentioned, scandal and PR, that stuff that would absolutely motivate someone to settle, notwithstanding the fact that they're not liable. So I mean, the broad point that you're giving at its maximal broadness, I would agree with. But sorry, I'll let you finish there, and then I have another follow up on Dersh.
Yeah. So in terms of the claims made against Prince Andrew, I still think there's like very reasonable doubt as to whether what she claimed could be understood to have been correct or proven. And I also think that there's no reasonable doubt that the strategic timing of her lawsuit against Andrew was very clever in terms of extracting the biggest possible settlement. But again, look at what she did with the settlement money. She got 10 million, we're told, through in terms of personal monetary damages, and then like another 3.7 million
for the foundation or
her
whatever.
supposed.
Who cares? Is this really doing that much work for you? I mean, like, okay, so she had some other way to receive money. She's kind of, this organization. Do you think it just goes to her character? Well,
it goes to the whole kind of like shambolic industry this thing spawned, where somehow she gets the queen to disperse millions of dollars to the supposed anti-sex trafficking fund. And that's part of the reason why I guess they saw that the settlement was palatable enough, because that it could be cast as a donation to the noble effort of combating sex trafficking or helping sex trafficking victims. And then the NGO just never did anything. And she just bought like a bunch of luxurious oceanside estates and ranches in Australia and lived like a relative life of luxury. And
she was
surrounded
scarred.
herself with other.
What do you say when like she was scarred and she, you don't buy that?
I mean, I don't buy that just being an all-purpose excuse for every confabulation that she let, like her trail of confabulations and just nonsense that she left behind her and tried to monetize. No, I don't buy that.
Okay.
I mean, she claims that she was already scarred when she met Maxwell. She claimed that she had already been a child sex trafficking victim.
And you don't buy her. You think she's making the whole thing up?
Sex trafficked throughout her entire life without interruption.
It happens.
She claims that she claimed that she was abused by her husband, her estranged husband, toward the end of her life in Australia. And then the local Australian authorities sided with the estranged husband on the ground that she was violent and mentally unstable, and withdrew custody of her children from her. So like maybe she is scarred. Look, I'm sure she did have a tumultuous upbringing. I'm not denying that. But if we're going to use this person as the basis to assume so many of like the foundational claims for the Epstein story are credibly established, I find that to be ridiculous. You could still have like sympathy for a delusional person, I guess, but you don't have to require me to credulously just reaffirm her nonsensical claims.
All right, back to Dersh real quick. This guy Dersh, Michael, I mean, he's using this attorney-client privilege as a sword and shield. On the one hand, he says, I can't talk about this very specific thing because I'm bound by attorney-client secrecy. And I just saw him do an interview with.
Talk about what thing?
Like, I can't talk about specific communications I've had with my then client, Jeffrey Epstein, because I'm bound by the rules of attorney-client privilege and confidentiality.
Wasn't he?
But what's that? Well,
isn't he bound by attorney-client privilege even in death?
Yes, even in death, of course he is. But then I just see it, and I don't have the quote right now, so I can't pull it up right now. But I saw him talking in a recent interview with some Jewish organization where he's like clearly disclosing what is obviously like attorney-client communications to try to vindicate Trump. And to try to be like, oh, I know that these people don't do anything. Because I asked him, don't you think I asked him about whether or not he was so this is I think this is the exact context actually, where he's like, don't you think we asked him whether or not he was a member of the intelligence agency? Of course we asked him that, because that would obviously benefit his case. But if he's saying that we asked this,
he asked that of Trump or of Epstein?
No, of Epstein. Wouldn't you think this is because this is in the context of questions about whether Trump is implicated in that kind of thing, or I think in the specific context, I'll withdraw the Trump comment just on the question of whether Epstein is involved with a foreign intelligence agency, right? So this is Dershowitz. Dershowitz says, of course, I can't disclose attorney-client communications, and yet he says he's disclosing the communications he had with Epstein at the time, because Dershowitz was in charge of negotiating, or at least one of the lawyers involved in negotiating this deal with Acosta. And he's disclosing that he asked Epstein about whether he's connected to intelligence services. That is a clear, if you're saying I asked him this question and received this answer for the purpose of providing legal advice, that's attorney-client privilege, bro, and that's obviously attorney-client privilege. And so I think that Dershowitz, and I'll find the quote for you, I'll get it for you, and I'll put it on X. I think he's playing fast and loose here. I think if he's disclosing communications of Epstein regarding to whether or not Epstein disclosed to him that he is or isn't part of or connected with intelligence agencies, then he can't use that as a shield and say, I can't disclose this and I can't disclose that. I think there's something shady going on with that. The selective disclosure.
Well, I would grant that it's possible that Dershowitz is not universally applying his claims to attorney-client privilege, or he's not applying attorney-client privilege with like universal consistency. But I'm not sure what effect that would have on anything that I've said here. And also, when I've heard him discuss this, it's not so much that he's saying he must withhold information in relation to Epstein. I've heard people demanding that he reveal what he knows to be contained in sealed records, which he's bound not to reveal by the judge's
the rules on grand jury secrecy. I think it's broader than that, and I'll provide it for you. It's
if you give me an example of something that he said that he can't reveal about Epstein because of attorney-client privilege, I'm happy to look at it. I grant that it's possible, and I would also
doesn't change your analysis at
argue that I'm not sure like what effect that would have on the argument that I've been making up to this point.
I think perhaps, again, it's a tangential point. It's one I wanted to raise because I know that you're generally aware of his arguments. But I think it would undermine potentially. I mean, listen, I'm not going all the way. I'm just saying potentially it would undermine Dershowitz's credibility, or at least that maybe he's being more self-serving. But again, I think it's a little much to.
Well, I mean, lawyers, especially when a client is deceased, have a pretty broad discretion in terms of how they will adhere to attorney-client privilege, right? It's not as though there's like some universal dictate that governs the contours of that remaining privilege, right?
There was one case in which I forget the name of the case, but where the lawyers for a decedent, someone who had died, their client, admitted to the lawyers that they had that he had killed someone else for a crime that someone else was being on trial for, that their client, who was then deceased, had committed. And they were bound by that secrecy not to reveal, and the guy who was completely innocent was convicted of the crime. And they went to the sentencing because the question was whether they would be getting the death penalty. And the lawyer said that they would only reveal the communication, the exonerating communication that would, herald this person's innocence, who had been convicted wrongly, if he were to be sentenced to death, and that only then would they reveal it. So
my intent here is never to like make a referendum on Dershowitz's like overall character or veracity necessarily. It's much more narrow, as I think you've mentioned. And I vehemently disagree with him on issues around Israel. I've even like briefly talked to him about our disagreements on Israel years ago. So yeah, I mean, that all remains. But like, let's just bracket Dershowitz for a moment.
Okay.
Because the case for Gouffre's fundamental unreliability, and the case particularly for how untenable it is to use her as the key source that undergirds this entire mythology, is it extends well beyond Dershowitz. So just to give you one example, in Gouffre's self-authored book, she or who knows who exactly wrote it, but like she claimed authorship of this book proposal or manuscript that for a potential memoir that she wrote. Because remember, let's just back up for a second. Virginia Giuffre burst on the scene initially in 2011 in terms of making public allegations having to do with Epstein. This was a few years before she ended up filing the motion for joinder in conjunction with Bradley Edwards for the CVRA litigation. And this came about in 2011 when there was a Daily Mail article that she was paid $160,000 for to simply do an interview and then provide
With a
this
picture.
notorious photo with Prince Andrew.
Right.
And actually, if you go back and look at that original 2011 article, the journalist who she's very closely collaborating with, Sharon Churcher, says that there's no claim being made that Virginia ever engaged in any illicit activity or illicit sexual activity with Andrew or any sexual activity with Andrew. So that was 2011. Of course, things evolve as the floodgates open for financial remuneration and publicity and whatnot. But after that Daily Mail article, I mean, I wish I could be paid $160,000 in 2011 terms to just like give a photo and like do a quick interview with someone, but I haven't gotten that opportunity yet. But then, like her and Churcher, this Daily Mail journalist, are trying to like strategize how they could get her a big book deal. So they're shopping her around for a literary agent, and this all came out in discovery. So nobody in defamation lawsuits. So nobody has to take my word for it. You can go check the record. So Churcher says to Gouffre, they're basically saying, how many prominent people can we think of who might have been in Epstein's orbit that we can use in our book proposal to get us more money for the proposal? And then Churcher says, don't forget about that pedo Dershowitz, or don't forget about Dershowitz. He's famous. He was in some movie whose name escapes me now in the 90s, I think, that fictionalized one of the cases he was involved in. And we all suspect he's a pedo. Yeah, exactly. And it's just why not just throw Dershowitz's name in there? And so Gouffre eventually obliges, but we eventually get a draft of some manuscript that Gouffre seemingly wrote that was going to be used to get her some enormous book deal. And her lawyers, notably, had attempted to conceal it for years, but eventually it was ordered to be provided on discovery. And just to give you one example, she claims in this book that Epstein directed her to have sex on the island in the Virgin Islands with basically ordered her to accompany which she took to be an implicit order to have sex with if requested.
Just a quick pause because there's a question in the chat and you just mentioned it. So there's two islands that Dershowitz owned in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Epstein
and the
owned,
one that Epstein owned, and the one that where like all the stuff happened, I think it was Little
St. James,
Little St. James or something. Yeah. So this is all happened in the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's the jurisdiction.
Little St. James.
Yeah.
My understanding is, and maybe somebody could correct me if I'm not getting this totally right, but my understanding is that the second island he purchased was kind of more of a wildlife preserve or something. It wasn't inhabited in the same way that the Little St. Jeff Island was, which had the house and had like guest houses and that sort of thing. So, sorry, now I lost my train of thought.
No, so you were talking about Gouffre's claim as she related.
Okay, yeah. So she says in her memoir that her memoir manuscript that at some point on Little St. James, Epstein implicitly directs her to provide sexual services to a Harvard professor named Stephen something. And that professor's last name is redacted in the court records. But Gouffre is eventually, and in the manuscript, Gouffre says that she eventually had full intercourse with this Harvard professor named Stephen, who, after giving him a massage, and then in a deposition after that, she specifically asked about whether she had sexual intercourse with this exact individual. And eventually, first she tries to kind of deflect or dissemble, but eventually she says on record with total, unambiguousness, no, she never had sex with this person. So it's clear. And there are other examples like that from her manuscript. So there's a whole track record of serial fabulism, which gets to why she was never called as a witness in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, why do you figure that Maureen Comey and her fellow prosecutors chose not to call as one of their witnesses in that trial the sort of signature, most prominent accuser of Epstein who generated and spawned all these theories as to a child sex trafficking ring. Could it have been because she would have obliterated the government's credibility and would have fallen apart on cross-examination? That's the theory I would go with.
But I mean, like this the decision with the same with the settlement decision. There could be a lot of reasons you don't bring someone up to be a witness in a case. It could be.
So, what do you think the reasons were that they didn't?
I have no. Listen. I'm here to facilitate the conversation.
I think I'm allowed to ask you a question.
Yeah, sure. You can ask me. So, I think in general there are problems with the testimony that you've identified, and there are inconsistencies and flaws. And I think, regardless of whether or not you think that they're a serial confabulist, your terms, right? You're
serial fabulous, yeah,
fabulous, and the fabulous. You have number one, the Dershowitz story, which you think is fake based on the settlement. Is there any other lie that you identify?
Well, wholly unsubstantiated to the point of like virtual certainty. Let's say that.
Okay, so that's on the Dershowitz.
On Dershowitz, yeah. I mean, they have the other Harvard professor tale that she told. She claims that she saw Al Gore and Tipper Gore on the island, and Gore. I mean, there's basically no evidence. Gore denied that he ever even met or knew Epstein. There's no record anywhere of Gore ever being on Epstein's island. And Guay never even really attempted to like further substantiate that claim. She just kind of threw it into her book, which was meant to entice potential literary agents and publishers, and then just moved on. So, I do think that there was like a whole fictionalized, dramatized component to what she was doing. And I also think that there was like way excessive credulity given to this person in light of her major.
But you're making a strong claim. You're making a claim that she's lied about multiple things, and what you've identified right now.
Stacey Schiff, I don't use the word lie in relation to her because to say someone's lying or has lied, it's usually an imputation of like willfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Like something is false, but you say it anyway, or a claim is not right, but you
regardless of how you're saying it. That's what my audience is here. My audience right now, a lot of them are triggered by you right now. I'm just you're good. You like that?
I don't know. I can't get into her head to know that the lying was necessarily like it could be that she's so delusional or detached from reality or motive, or like she could have created memories in her own head, or there are a lot of other things. There are a lot of other potential motivations that she could have had in terms of like her conscious or unconscious thought that gave rise to these serial false claims that she made, beyond like willful, deliberate lying, to the point that I think it's more accurate to say that she was a fabulous more so than that she was like knowingly lying.
And that's why you use the term fabulous, which you understand to be someone who says things that are not true or that aren't substantiated.
Who conjures things with, let's say, reckless disregard for the truth.
Okay. All right. So interesting. I'm conscious of our times, and there's a whole aspect of this that I want to get to.
And I have one thing I'd like to ask you about.
Yes, for sure. Ask. Why don't you ask me first, and then I'll get to, because I want to get into the Trump stuff. Because for me, I'm agnostic as to. I'll tell you what my position is. I agree with you to the extent that you say that there's no smoking gun proof for the major narrative. That's been my position. I haven't seen proof that would convince me, or what I take to be like, a reasonable person, that we have proof, even on a preponderance of evidence, that any of like the core mythological claims. When I say mythology, I don't mean they're necessarily untrue, but I mean to say they're central to this narrative that I haven't seen. I'm agnostic on that. And so on that respect, I agree. But the one thing, if anything has moved me to being like, this is weird. And I think that you would agree that like there's a lot of weird stuff.
It's Trump's rhetoric.
It's Trump's stuff. Yeah, so I want to get to that and be like, how do you make sense? Because you already knew where I was going. How do you make sense of what Trump is doing?
Let's get to that in a moment. So
yeah, so you got
on the back burner for just a moment, and we can go as long as you want. I'm
sick.
So it's not just that. I mean, in terms of what my position is, simply to assert that there's no smoking gun evidence would give short shrift to what my position is at this point. I think, for one thing, there were huge evidentiary problems and due process problems with Maxwell's trial, such that, yes, whether or not it would somehow be used in furtherance of a cover-up for Trump, which I don't think anybody can say with any certainty, or that there be even anything to cover up, I do think that her appellate lawyers have an incredibly good case those convictions should not stand. It's not because I have less like deep-seated affinity for Ghislaine Maxwell or Jeffrey Epstein or anything, because I know I've done the amount of research and reading and talking to people that I probably should have done contemporaneously when my kind of skepticism was growing around this stuff, in particularly in relation to the Maxwell trial. But like I was just sort of engrossed in other things at the time, so it wasn't a huge priority for me. So because I think that like even the mere conviction of Maxwell really is just bizarre in the manner that in which it came
based
about.
on the
So,
NPA,
for example,
wait, based on the co-conspirator clause in the NPA, or based on the substance?
No, that's sort of even a minor issue in terms of what I'm talking about. I mean, I do think that there is a good claim that, look, if the DOJ is going to come to a non-prosecution agreement with someone, and in the NDA say this is meant to be a global resolution, and the MPA provides that any potential co-conspirator to Epstein arising from his charged criminal conduct is hereby immunized from any further federal prosecution.
But you've read the briefings of the government. Are you not convinced by the government's arguments there? So the government will say in response to that.
Even if you disagree on the merits with the government agreeing to that non-prosecution arrangement, then I don't understand how that would not immunize Maxwell if she's being charged as a co-conspirator of Epstein.
Well, this is what I mean. Like the government argues, and I agree the government has a better the argument.
The jurisdictional one.
Yes, exactly. Which
I don't really buy.
In what sense don't you buy? I mean, there's binding precedent in the Supreme, in the 11th Circuit. I think it's in the 11th Circuit. Fuck, now I don't know.
Yeah, but
the Second Circuit or 11th Circuit about that.
There's dispute among this in the circuits, which is why Maxwell's appellate lawyers are appealing to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, fair enough. Listen, and we'll see what the Supreme Court says. I just think, based on, I think you have the better the argument.
I think it's implausible that when the DOJ acquiesced to the non-prosecution agreement, or when Epstein's defense attorneys signed off on the non-prosecution agreement, anybody anticipated that, oh, this only would apply to the South Florida. It couldn't possibly apply to New York.
Dur should have checked his, crossed his T's and dotted his I's then. I mean, that's his own problem. Especially like specifically for Epstein, it says just in this district. And so I don't think Epstein, if he were around today.
But for the co-conspirators, it doesn't make that specification. So why would that specify for Epstein, but not the potential co-conspirators?
Well, I think it's because typically like the government, the U.S., people take that to be, specific to the actual U.S. Attorney's Office that's actually doing it. Well, that's what at least the government argues. So, and that's what the case law in Second Circuit says. I grant that, but that, by the way, gets to the, because you always put sweetheart deal in quotes. Even the government says this was a quote highly unusual provision, the co-conspirator clause. Would you? Sure,
it was unusual, but it wasn't unheard of. And I don't know if you read the article of mine that I published on Saturday that I sent you, where I go through the different aspects of the non-prosecution agreement based on the 350-page DOJ OPR report that I wish more people would read. I know nobody's going to read it, but I actually did read it. And
I just want to say, in general, people should read the Mueller report. People should read the Durham report, like all these different things.
I've read them.
Yeah. People don't actually read the reports. The Horowitz report for Crossfire Hurricane, all this stuff is like really awesome too.
Yeah, Horowitz. I read that one.
By the way, at some point we should have an argument on Russia stuff. But go ahead.
Okay, let's not get derailed. Totally.
No, right now.
But I think that what makes clear, one thing that's made clear in that OPR report, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree, is that nobody who was involved in that prosecution had any cognizance that down the line people would perceive any potential co-conspirators clause to pertain to high-profile associates of Epstein, like a Bill Clinton or a Bill Gates or a Donald Trump or anybody. It was almost.
I agree with you, but what people will say is that's what they say. That's what the prosecutors say.
But they have contemporaneous documentation of this as well. I mean, there's some retrospective stuff, but there's also contemporaneous stuff.
I get it. I know.
The only co-conspirators that were contemplated were the four younger female associates, female employees essentially of Epstein, and also potential victims.
Yeah.
Who could have been 18 and therefore trafficked another teenage girl to Epstein.
Which, by the way, I think you and I would agree would be bizarre. to charge the alleged victims under those statutes, but there are certain readings
by the letter of the law they could be
where they traffic
right?
themselves and stuff. I'm just saying, I understand the government's argument there. I just want to listen. The audience is filled with people that I just want to, I want to make sure they're heard. That
are their heads exploding right now?
A lot of them are pretty upset with you, but I just want to make
sure
the
entire internet has been violently hostile to me for the past 3 weeks, so I'm used to it.
Okay, so
but let me keep going. The Maxwell trial, the applicability or not of the 2007-8 non-prosecution agreement is not even really one of the principal reasons why I'm arguing that trial was.
It's a side argument. There's a
side argument. Yeah. It's maybe the one that could be most resonant for the Supreme Court, but just on an evidentiary basis, people don't seem to know. Like, do you think it's popularly understood when people talk about the Maxwell trial and the fact that she's convicted of sex trafficking, that the judge instructed jurors that of the 4 witnesses, only 2 of them could be said to have engaged in sexual contact that would be illegal under the charges that were brought by the government. So one of the
absolutely not. No, that's not part of the popular narrative at all.
Not at all. Right. One of the two people whose conduct was claimed by the judge said the jurors must not use to convict Maxwell for anything to do with illegal sexual conduct was Annie Farmer, who is the younger sister of this woman, Maria Farmer, who's been making the rounds lately. And after having been a 25-year-old woman who was in the employ of Epstein in the mid 90s. And like she encountered, she saw Donald Trump ogling her one time when she was wearing running shorts. But beyond that, she has no information about Donald Trump actually doing anything illegal. And even her claims about Epstein are a little weird, but like her she then procured or trafficked even her younger sister to come meet Epstein by flying to New York. Eventually the younger sister flies to New Mexico. And then according to the younger sister, Annie Farmer, she receives at some point a non-sexualized massage from Maxwell where like Maxwell rubs to the extent that a 16 or 17-year-old can consent to having a massage. It was a consensual massage. Maxwell was said to have rubbed like the upper part of her chest and didn't touch any sexual, didn't touch her nipples, didn't touch any sexual organ at all. And then it was claimed that Epstein sort of embraced her or, cuddled her or something at some point. But the judge said the government wanted to argue that constituted illegal sexual conduct, and the judge, who was otherwise very pro-prosecution, determined that no, that conduct did not rise to the level of what the government had charged, so she ordered the jury to discount it. How pro-prosecution was the judge? Well, she took the exceedingly unusual step, which I know is not unprecedented, but it's usually used in much more narrowly circumscribed circumstances, of allowing several of these purported victims to testify using fake names, even though in one case, one of these victims who was allowed to use a fake name had already publicly told her story, so to say, about Epstein.
But you already said that's not unusual. You've already said that's not unusual, given.
I think it's not unprecedented, but it's also not usual. It's more typically used if there's an acute threat of some kind of violent reprisal that could be taken against a victim if they are identified in open court. Whereas in this case, there was no, these people claim, oh, we're scared of harassment, or we're scared that the public might be mean to us. But beyond that, there was no credible threat of any acute.
So what do you take people who are like, all right, Michael Tracy, he's saying all this stuff. He sounds like he hates these women. He sounds like he hates these victims. What's your response to those people?
I don't have any personal hatred toward them. Why would I? I'm trying to dispassionately assess their role in this story that has engulfed U.S. politics and caused the U.S. House of Representatives to be prematurely adjourned last week.
Adjourned, yeah.
And it has people telling me all day, every day, that now Donald Trump somehow is covering up a child pedophile, a pedophile sex trafficking ring, which I think is outrageous. And
we'll finish your train of thought there, because I do want to get to the Trump stuff. But yeah.
So the pro-prosecution judge who granted the prosecution's motion to allow these people to testify using fake names, which I think is a violation of due process, clearly, because why? Because that conveys to the jury that these purported victims have already been deemed credible enough by the government that they have to have their identities withheld for some reason.
For the audience's
And
benefit, so the Constitution does, obviously there's the due process clause, but there's also the confrontation clause
right,
of the Sixth Amendment as well, to confront your those who are testifying
exactly.
against you. And so there are issues, constitutional issues that Michael is raising here that I don't think necessarily are specific to this case, and just broadly, though they may be specific to this case, to the extent that you're saying that there's not extenuating circumstances that are present here that might be present in other cases where you maybe would take the extraordinary step of anonymizing people, like for example, like when it comes to like mafia cases.
There could be potentially imaginable circumstances that I could see someone presenting to me, and I finding at least potentially reasonable. But this certainly wouldn't have been one.
Wouldn't meet your bar. Okay, so
especially given the confrontation clause of the Sixth Amendment, which I think is pretty sacrosanct.
And given new life by Justice Antonin Scalia.
Yeah, exactly. But so then, even among the victims that were allowed to testify pseudonymously, and see, I catch myself using the term victim when I mean to qualify it. Do
you care that much about it at this point?
Not really. I guess it doesn't matter. Yeah. But this was a woman who, I'll give you her name. Would it enrage the audience if I gave you her real name? It's not that hard to discover.
I don't think it would at this point. No.
Okay, and so her name is Anuska Di Giorgio, and she was like a British socialite, essentially. She came from a very wealthy family. She was an aspiring model. She appeared on billboards, modeling underwear and so forth. And she maintained. She claimed that. Hold on, let me restart.
Yeah.
The judge also eventually instructed the jurors that any claim that this person made in relation to her sexual activity with Epstein and or Maxwell, I don't think she made any claim against Maxwell, but any claim that she made against Epstein could not be regarded by the jurors as illegal for the purposes of convicting Maxwell. So of the four, grand total of 4 witnesses that were called to testify against Maxwell, half of them were discarded in terms of the viability
underlying
of
substantive sexual,
proving overt acts that would have been illegal sexual acts. And yet, I mean, these people just get celebrated and touted everywhere as like having these dispositively vindicated claims. I tweeted earlier today or last night that there was a clip of Kristen Welker interviewing. I'll pull it up for you. I can use my screen share thing if you.
Sure.
Okay, hold on one second.
I won't know. Didn't they find a bunch of child pornography on Epstein's in his estate?
Well, I mean, they may have, but the government hasn't like produced any itemized like list of what they recovered in that vein.
Oh, you want a priv log of all the CP?
I mean, I would want, not that I don't want to see it, people. What I want is like I would like to know how many materials along these lines they claim to have seized, right? Because they conflated it in that DOJ memo with
commercial
pornography. And that conflation actually is evident in what Speaker Mike Johnson says here in his interview with Welker. So let's just listen to this briefly.
Okay.
My question is, are you open to a pardon or commutation? I mean, Mr. Speaker, the victims referred to Maxwell as Epstein's right-hand woman. Here's what one victim who testified under a pseudonym told the court at sentencing, quote, "The many acts that were perpetrated on me by Epstein, including rape, strangulation, and sexual assault, were never consensual and would not have occurred had it not been for the cunning and premeditated role Ghislaine Maxwell played." Is that someone deserving of a pardon or commutation in any circumstance, Mr. Speaker?
If you're asking my opinion, I think 20 years was a pittance. I think she should have a life sentence at least. I mean, think of all these unspeakable crimes. And as you noted earlier, probably 1,000 victims. I mean, it's hard to put into words how evil this was, and that she orchestrated it and was a big part of it. At least under the criminal sanction, I think is an unforgivable thing. So again, not my decision, but I have great pause about that as any reasonable person.
Okay, so I mean, we have now an epidemic of people who know basically nothing about this case other than the little tidbits that they absorb from social media or from the popular media are just opining on it. Number one, Maxwell actually was acquitted on one count, and that count had to do with a girl who the government claimed was 14 when she initially engaged with Epstein, and that Maxwell purportedly trafficked her. Maxwell was actually acquitted of that. Um, but just like the 1,000 victims thing, I don't know what credible foundation that's in the available facts or evidence would substantiate that claim. It just seems like a nice round number that they threw out that then gives like the public the impression that there was this massive child sex trafficking network with
Which I
like
don't understand
untold.
if they're just floating that and they're using that big number. That does seem to be like circumstantial evidence, perhaps that other people are involved, because like that number just seems so large.
Right. It makes no
How could
sense. But then in terms of like what Kristen Welker quotes to Johnson, notice that she uses the pseudonym of this person, Kate. Well, we know who Kate is. I just explained to you who she is. She was like a former reality TV contestant. She was an actress,
Wait,
and
Rowdy?
she had
Did you
already
say
made
Rowdy?
public statements,
What do
including
you
on
mean by
NBC
Rowdy?
News, under her own identity prior to the trial. But like she had to be protected from public scrutiny after having volunteered herself to comment on this publicly, which makes no sense. But Welker quotes this person's statements at the victim impact, her victim impact statement, which again, another very constitutionally questionable practice in my judgment, which is that after the conviction, so-called
And
purported
judge
victims.
hears inadmissible evidence or evidence that wasn't
Exactly.
admitted.
So
for the
here
purpose
she
of-
says stuff that she never claimed while she was testifying at the trial, which is that she was raped or sexually assaulted, or none of it was consensual, because those claims at that phase of the process don't get cross-examined at all, and yet it's the most salacious sounding stuff. So Kristen Welker, of course, hones in on it and broadcasts it to an audience that will never look for any additional context. And I find that to be just indicative or emblematic of how grossly misleading so much of the coverage around this stuff is. Kate, quote unquote, meaning Anushka Degorgiou, literally maintained friendly contact with Epstein that she initiated throughout her 20s and 30s into her 30s.
But is that
She
inconsistent
requested,
this kind of
she
abusive stuff
requested,
happens, Mike,
she
Michael, you know that.
requested that she be able to come visit Epstein in his New York townhouse and stay over at the townhouse. So, I mean, please, if we're going with a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, there are so many doubts that were successfully sowed by the defense over the course of that trial. I just give you one little example there that I find the verdict to be not sustainable. And if the appellate lawyers have to go with this technical argument around the NPA, that makes sense. But
So you would be fine if Trump pardoned her.
on a more substantive evidentiary level, there are huge problems that we could spend all night talking about.
See, okay, but a couple things on that. So one, listen, I already told you I'm a partisan Democrat, but
Sure.
Don't you feel a little bit for Mike Johnson there? He can't give any other answer, right? I mean, you're a realist. You fundamentally understand that he can't say anything different, because if he did, he would get the treatment you're getting right now in my chat.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, do I feel for him because of that? No. I mean, I think he's clearly just, he got the memo for what the Trump administration's talking point on this. It was that Trump, in theory, wants to release all credible information, but we don't know exactly what form that would be supposed to take. Also, like, what does it say about Kash Patel going on podcasts while he's a private citizen and screeching that the former FBI director, Christopher Wray, is concealing a literal list of pedophiles, and put on your big boy pants and tell us who the pedophiles are? How does that square with now, we're going to very gingerly release only all credible information? Okay. So do I feel for Johnson? No, because he's just a lackey of Trump. And so I think Johnson's actually very clever. I think people underrate his political acumen, exactly, going back several years now. So because I sense that he's probably more politically clever than me, I don't really feel for him. I think he's just doing what he needs to do.
Number two, what would you say someone who says, for example, you've already conceded that Epstein did something criminal, You said that Epstein did something immoral.
Epstein himself conceded it. He pleaded guilty.
And Epstein, yes, but also you, because you acknowledge that's something you should take into consideration when you're saying your standard, or at least what you take to be true, or what you think most likely to be true. And fundamentally, Maxwell knew about it. Maxwell was involved in some capacity. So how much of a miscarriage of justice is this? It seems like Trump is floating a pardon. It seems like, based on your statements, I don't know if I should infer this, you wouldn't necessarily be opposed to her getting pardoned, because you think, in some respects, either on the procedural issue or on the substantive issue, that there was a miscarriage of justice.
But this idea that she's a mastermind or the ringleader to a gigantic world-spanning child sex trafficking ring, which is what people believe her to have been, I just don't think is remotely established by even a preponderance of the evidence, much less what it would take to convict her of that in a criminal trial. I mean, a bunch of the marquee witnesses never even mentioned in the preceding years prior to the 2021 trial, when they were either interviewed by the FBI, took part in depositions for civil litigation. Almost none of them, or like several of them at least, never even identified Maxwell as somebody that they were making any kind of accusation against. It just then happened that Epstein died under mysterious circumstances in prison, and then the government, which had poured so many resources into prosecuting Epstein, decided to prosecute Maxwell as a proxy for Epstein, and then kind of crafted a case along with that imperative. And they were aided in their ability to craft that case by the fact that once Epstein was dead, these victims' lawyers, like Bradley Edwards, David Boies, etc., linked up with the lawyers for Epstein's estate, and they established this victims' compensation fund, which allowed for claims by purported victims to be adjudicated non-adversarially and confidentially. And some of these victims would hire personal injury lawyers who admitted that they advised them that in order to maximize their chances of getting the biggest possible settlement, they should cooperate with the government in its prosecution of Maxwell, and fill in the factual record in accordance with that prerogative. So let me just ask you, like, based on
go for it.
What I just read you about from the NBC thing.
Yeah,
I mean, don't you think it's don't you think a lot of that information are like pretty glaring omissions? I'm not saying Kristen Welker should do a whole hour on this one accuser, but like, it's pretty misleading the way that's presented, right?
I think it is misleading to the extent of the general narrative, because even if you ask the regular person, they'll say something in response like the following. They'll say, what? So Epstein was innocent the whole time. Who did they traffic them to? So their understanding of what the trial is of Maxwell is much broader than what actually was in the trial. So on that front, I think if your claim is, do I agree with you that the way the media has portrayed the substantive allegations is misleading? 100%. Same thing with politicians, by the way, and same thing with members of the Trump administration and Trump surrogates, who I hope that we'll get to. So if that's your claim, I think I agree on the notion that the media is not necessarily doing the best job of factually transmitting what actually occurred in these proceedings.
And why are they not doing that job? Because there's an ideology out there to simply affirm the stories or the affirm the experiences of purported victims and not do a whole lot of scrutiny.
You say that, but people have been there's a media apparatus that sometimes will be, not very that will like defer to the victims a lot in these cases, but there's also a lot of scrutiny that the media plays on some victims. You think about the Amber Heard trial. You think about, the Andrew Tate accusations. You think, you know what I'm talking about though? Like,
which media apparatus currently in existence would you expect to scrutinize an Epstein victim? I don't think there is one. I mean, this story is unique in a lot I think it's a unique story. And I think that it gets to, I don't think that a politician right now could give any of the things that you're saying and expect not to get but the thing, except for Trump, apparently, because Trump says it's a hoax.
Trump says it's a hoax. So I want to get to that a little bit, because the thing that makes me most suspicious, now I do think that there's substantive evidence of guilt of Maxwell.
Let me give you one more thing, because people think, oh, maybe I'm nitpicking or cherry picking a victim. I want to give you one other just example of what I'm talking about here in terms of evidentiary problems. At trial, the defense introduced testimony that one of the victims who went by the pseudonym Carolyn. That actually was her legitimate first name.
Mm-hmm.
She ended up dying of a drug overdose not long thereafter. Clearly a troubled person, troubled history. Like, she had a lot of legal problems. Her boyfriends had legal problems. I'm not saying that to like discredit her, but in terms of like beyond a reasonable doubt credibility, things that she would had to recall for this trial from like 25 years before or so, or 20 years roughly. I think there is a threshold that has to be met. Carolyn says that she was at the time of the trial a schizophrenic who was hearing voices inside her head telling her that sex traffickers were going to come abduct her children. And this is a person whose memories from 20 years earlier the jury had to rely on for credible testimony. But let me just give you an example. The defense introduced a deposition that she sat for in October 2009, in which she was asked repeatedly, quote, "Did you ever have sexual intercourse with Mr. Epstein?" And she replied, "No." She said, then she was asked, "Do you know what I mean by sexual intercourse, or do I need to go through the various acts?" She says, answer, "Oh, I am pretty sure I know what sexual intercourse is, being that I have 2 children." And then she's asked again, "We want to make sure we're clear about some things. Did Epstein ever insert his penis into any part of your body at all?" And she said, "I just said I've never had any sexual intercourse with Epstein. And I knew that." And she goes on and on denying this. And then fast forward to the 2021 trial, and she's essentially saying that she had sexual intercourse with Epstein, more or less. And so, like,
more
I
or
don't know.
less. Just say more about that. More or less.
Okay, she says that she says that she's had criminal sexual contact with Epstein, and basically telling a much different story than when she had told under deposition in 2009 and 2021. When the incentives are different, right? Like, the floodgates have opened around civil litigation. Epstein was dead. These settlements became available, not just Epstein's estate, but Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan. And I'm not saying, look, if there was a troubled person who could get millions of dollars from JP Morgan, I don't begrudge that. I would get money from JP Morgan.
Do you think it's possible they targeted some of these people because, I mean, since you've accepted that like Epstein did do some stuff that's quote unquote untoward and criminal, don't you think it's possible, if not likely, that they picked their victims based on the fact that their perception that
she says that she says that she said at trial he did have intercourse with her, meaning he attempted to insert his penis
into some. Okay, got it. So you're identifying a contradiction there. Listen, I
mean, are you? Wouldn't you? I mean,
I would acknowledge that there's if you're representing the deposition correctly, I would say that there's absolutely a contradiction.
I'll send you the excerpt.
Yeah, no, I'm not
read it verbatim.
I think it's the definition of contradiction. He says in one instance that they had sexual intercourse and one they didn't. So I
do think I think that the girls, let's say teenage girls, whether 18 or just above or 18 or just below, like in that range, who are going to be probably the most susceptible to being recruited into something like this, are probably going to come from less stable socioeconomic backgrounds. Hence why they really want to get the quick $200 for doing the sexualized massage, and why they can be convinced by somebody, or they might have not have as strong a parental oversight as maybe could have discourage them from doing so. And so, yeah, I mean, that totally stands to reason.
So I guess my question is, like, you understand that these have, that there are explanations perhaps for inconsistent testimony, which happens a lot in the course of litigation, especially with like these kinds of victim situations. Why doesn't Epstein's quote unquote MO factor into, do you think it proves too much? In other words, to say, you're going to take the character of these witnesses against their fundamental accusations. Why not, take the fundamental character of Epstein and Maxwell and weigh that against them in a similar way? I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but like, it seems like you're focusing on the victim as opposed to the character of the perpetrators.
Well, it's because
alleged perpetrators, alleged victims,
right? But because if we're going to be told that this was like the most notorious and wide ranging child sex trafficking ring maybe in history, and the government can choose amongst, we're told, like 1,000 victims, whatever that means. And they choose these four individuals to prove what it is that they're trying to prove, not about Epstein, but about Maxwell. And there are so many glaring problems with each one of their testimonies, and how their allegations have to do with Maxwell came about only very recently, almost entirely after Epstein's death, when there were strategizing going on about how to best extract settlements from these various compensation funds and by aiding in the government with prosecuting somebody in lieu of Epstein, and the only target was Maxwell, apparently. I just think that those glaring evidentiary problems cannot be discounted in favor of putting a premium on what people understand to be someone's MO or something, I mean, especially because they were talking about trafficking, right? Or like interstate commerce. I mean, a lot of the women who claim that they were trafficked were not even minors, generally not the ones who testified at this particular trial, although there was like fudging going on with dates. It's very unclear that some of them, with the exception of possibly that one Carolyn, who I think it's plausible did represent that, who was in fact 14 and like represented that maybe she was 18. But again, that's no defense for an adult male in his 50s.
Sure.
But others, like they look like they probably fudged with dates because, you could say that, when I met him in 1994 instead of 1996, and then if you first met him when you were 17, you get a bigger payout. Like, why couldn't they come up with one victim ever anywhere who
the perfect victim? You want the perfect victim, Michael Tracy?
Not a perfect victim, just a victim that couldn't be impeached 6 ways from Sunday.
Okay, I appreciate your point on there. I think that there are some problems with the testimony that you're pointing to, specifically with Maxwell. I still think that there's substantive evidence of guilt of Maxwell. And with Epstein,
do you think it's reasonable to wonder whether the beyond a reasonable doubt threshold was reached?
No, well, with respect to at least the trafficking, and again, I don't have perfect recall now. I've read reporting on the trial, and I haven't done as deep of a dive, I'll admit to you, in terms of the actual evidence. But in terms of my confidence level, just personally, that Maxwell was involved in trafficking, I don't have the same kind of substantive problem with trafficking as you do, as a concept. I think that is
trafficking minors.
Whether it's trafficking, I'm not sure. But at least trafficking.
That's the key. That's the key.
Why is that a key?
Here. Because that's one of the things she was charged with. Trafficking minors.
No, what I mean to say is,
and that's like fundamental. There is a notion of public understanding of what happened.
There is a notion of trafficking, criminal trafficking, with adults, and you might disagree with that as a legal concept, but that is do you think it's an incoherent concept?
I do think it's largely incoherent, but either way, whether it's incoherent or coherent, I thought we basically agreed that what plainly informs the public understanding of this matter is not trafficking of adult women who are engaged in transactional sex, but of minors. Pedophilia, right?
I've already agreed. I think that there's plenty of misinformation to go around, and lack of understanding of what's informing these judicial proceedings. So on that, I think, definitely agree. And that's why,
before you get to Trump, here's the question I want to ask you.
Yeah, go for it.
So after Epstein died in August of 2019, the government obviously was compelled to dismiss the pending charges against him because there was nobody who was alive to charge with anything anymore, prosecute with anything anymore. And then something very, very unusual happened, which I admit I wasn't fully cognizant of at the time in terms of its somewhat, or actually very disturbing implications, which is that Judge Berman in New York, and then to some degree the judge in Miami, allowed for like these public struggle sessions to take place in his courtroom under a pretext that it was like a live issue or a debatable issue whether the government was compelled to dismiss the charges once the defendant was deceased. Therefore, given Judge Berman's committed deference to victims and eagerness to rise up the victims and let them tell their stories, they just brought all these victims, including
What's the harm? Including
Gouffre, into the courtroom and let them just like rattle off these
What's
tales.
the harm? I mean, don't you want them to have to be on the record, or what you're saying is it poisons the well in terms of the public discourse? Or like, what's your issue with that?
Because nobody had been convicted, nobody had been found guilty, and yet you parade these victims into a courtroom and give them like the imprimatur of the court for them.
You
to
think
make
it gives
these
them the
statements.
imprimatur of the court by having them just say to the court what is going on, or is it the fact that they're
Yes.
not subject to cross-examination?
If they're giving victim impact statements, yes, I do think that gives them the imprimatur of the court.
Okay, give me 1 second. I have to go pee really bad. I've been
Okay.
holding it in, but just give me 1 second, okay?
Hello, everybody. I just put in some nicotine gum, so excuse the chewing. Maybe I will pause so you don't have to hear my disgusting noises. Oh, by the way, like people who are watching, if you're interested, maybe I'll tell.
Alrighty, I'm coming back. One
Okay.
sec. That was fast. And yes, chat, I did wash my hands. All right. 1 sec. Let me put this back on.
Does the chat usually accuse you of not washing your hands after?
Yeah,
you
because
have a bathroom?
my bathroom is like close.
What do you have, like a urinal
And
right next to your
no,
computer or something?
no.
Okay.
It's like very, very, very close, and so I'm able to do it quickly and wash my hands. But before they're like, you
Are
haven't
there any
washed your hands.
streamers who like stream all day every day, like Destiny, who like have a urinal apparatus set up at their computer desk or something?
No idea.
Okay.
No, I don't think Destiny has that. No, but no, it's a good question. All right, so what you're saying is your issue with that is it gives the accusations in a similar vein as I'm understanding your critique about the victim impact statements at sentencing, that it gives.
But this is even more egregious.
It's egregious. You're saying because there was
Because
no
there's been no
basis
conviction.
because that there's no basis to. This is not a victim impact statement at sentencing because there's no conviction because it was dropped because he died. Fair. And, what's the
exactly.
and what's the harm?
Even if even when there are convictions, I still have some qualms with this practice of victim impact statements, especially from victims who were never called to trial, never had to be cross-examined, and can introduce just brand new claims that are not subject to any cross-examination.
What's the harm other than this kind of due process?
The harm is to injure due process.
Yeah,
because the government can give its imprimatur to victims as though it's been legally established.
Epstein's due process, to Epstein's due process, or to Maxwell's?
Well, yes, I'm sorry. Even the most people, even the people we despise the most, have due process.
Even
that's
dead
like
people?
that's like a cornerstone of the.
Do dead people get due process? I mean, I don't think dead people have any rights. Do you?
I think dead people have a right in that they can't be treated as though they were convicted when they were alive when they weren't.
Okay. Maybe they have.
I mean, if you die and like there's some like clamor to have alleged victims of yours,
there are probably some rights. There are probably some rights. I don't know if due process rights. Yeah. There are some rights in terms of like, for example, one that we were just talking about with FOIA, there were some. I don't know if they conceived it as a right of the decedent, or if it's the right of. But basically, after 9/11. There were a bunch of like tapes or documents related. I think it was tapes, audio recordings of family members who died and perished on 9/11, and some people wanted to get access to those copies. And one of the bases that I think one of the bases they used to block access to those tapes is because of the interest of the family or the interest of the dead people in their own like final, I don't know, their final death situations or something. So I guess I'll step back from the notion they don't have any rights.
I would recommend go read that. This is 2019 New York Law School article, "Punishment Without Process: Victim Impact Proceedings for Dead Defendants," and they go through what Judge Berman did here and all the myriad due process issues that I think this brought about.
Fair enough. I'll take it. Can you send that to me? I'm actually interested because
okay,
I might have spoken too quickly about the due process.
I'll DM it to you.
Yeah,
just so people realize that I'm not the only one who's ever made this argument about it.
No, I appreciate that, and I care a lot about due process, and so I'm very interested to hear the argument. I haven't heard it before, and again,
I just think that there's a lot of the way that this Epstein thing came to function generated a lot of highly questionable practices in terms of due process that maybe are typified by that questionable hearing that was held, but are by no means limited to it.
Okay. No, I'm interested in that a lot. I care a lot about due process, and so I think I maybe spoke too quickly on whether or not dead people have due process. I'm sure that there's some amount of rights, and I actually want to learn more about this. So thank you. Is one of the reasons I bring you on is because I think regardless of, and in the chat, I know you guys are all fucking in revolts about even even having Michael talking.
What else is
there?
there?
I know, but I think it's important to hear people out and to actually listen to the arguments, and I've always been about that. Okay, finally.
Yes.
Trump is sussing me out, man. So explain it. Why? What is going on? They're hiding something, right? I mean, this whole thing about it's a hoax made by Obama. He must know that's not going to play with the base. He must know that he's causing himself all sorts of consternation. If there's nothing to see there, why not release something? And why not release a full catalog of all the different things? Why not give anything other than what they did? So explain that, given your position.
Right. So I fully admit at this point that I've become just a full-blown Epstein crazed obsessive person. I never thought that this was going to be at all central to my identity, but I have gotten very engrossed in the issue. And so over the weekend, I did decide I would do what I think any conscientious American should have been doing last weekend, which is going to the boardwalk in Seaside, New Jersey, and interviewing random people about what they think about Epstein.
You're kidding.
Trump.
You took a video of it?
There's a video that was published tonight. We can watch it if you want.
Yeah,
but people
put
go
up
look
a
it
little
up.
bit.
Okay, we'll pull up a little bit.
Put up a clip of it.
Because I bring that up because I did ask people about Trump.
These are honest Americans going about their weekend.
Red-blooded Americans, yeah.
And you walked up to them and asked about Epstein.
I did. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to share.
Well, I mean, I think that's. Yeah,
go ahead. So here's
this is a law review.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go back onto Twitter. Sorry, X, which I used to saying. And
oh, that's so funny.
Here's the video. They're all very emblematic of the core New Jersey Shore demographic, I think.
Sure. Are you a New Jerseyite?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first guy, if people want to go watch it, go to my YouTube. The first guy, amazingly, I mean, this was like divine intervention. Oh, I'm sharing the wrong screen right now. The first guy, hold on, gotta fix the screen that I'm sharing.
Are you possibly like shaking your leg?
I might be. Yeah, I do that as a nervous tick. I'm not nervous, but I have like a nervous energy, I guess. The first guy that I talked to, turned out to be a this is hard to believe. It's amazing. But this first guy I talked to ended up being a guy who it just so happened. This is the first person we encountered. The first person we asked if he wanted to talk about Epstein. Turned out that he had done a boat tour in the Virgin Islands where they sailed to Epstein's island.
Pure randomness that the first person who was willing to talk.
That's a true story.
Yeah.
So we could just play a little bit of
play a little bit of it.
What's your name?
Mike.
So all anybody could talk about is this whole issue with Epstein, and is there a cover-up? What is Trump up to? Are there prominent people whose improprieties are being concealed from us? What do you make of the whole thing?
Well, aside from Trump, Epstein, I floated around this island even now, and there's still stuff going on, I would think. But
wow,
I guess he got what he deserved. Anybody who would harm children, my book's no good, and I'm sure in everybody's book, it would be no good.
You think stuff's still going on there now?
Well, I don't know. We went by there.
What are you thinking right now? Can you pause real quick?
Guns.
Oh, you went there?
well, on the out.
So
I
what are you
didn't
thinking when
immediately. I
he
didn't
says all
immediately.
that stuff?
I didn't
Yeah.
immediately grasp that he was actually physically at the or like toward the vicinity of the island. I mean, I'm thinking, okay, this is like way too perfect because people are going to think I
Yeah.
manufactured this somehow. That the very first guy had actually physically been there.
Now, what are the odds you think he's lying?
I don't see what reason he would have to lie. I mean, you can do. I know, like the person who was my videographer, she had also been on a boat. It's just like a generic tourist-oriented boat tour in the Virgin Islands, and it so happens that you kind of sail past the Epstein Island, and the tour guide points it out. So it's not like an Epstein-specific tour. But people.
Well, sorry, I'm just to pause real quick. There's a comment. This reminds me of when Trump was doing the propaganda with the president of South Africa. Stop letting him just do this with no pushback. You need to identify a specific thing you're taking issue with Michael saying, and put it in the chat. Because if you just say that, like, I don't know, A, what you want me to push back on, and B, like, if you just take issue with the general position he has or his position on victims, I think we've like gone through that a little bit. But yeah, just be more specific on your commentary. Sorry.
That's a problem I encounter a lot. They just don't like the mere fact that I'm even talking about this from this angle. It's not that they have a specific criticism or they can make, or there's some specific claim I've made that they can refute. But anyway,
Outside of it, you're not allowed to go on it. But yeah, we were in the Virgin Islands in May. So I don't know what's going on, but there's something going on.
were you on like a boat tour or something? And did they point out this is Epstein Island?
Oh yeah, we went around it a couple times.
Did everybody clap? Or I'm just,
Nah, yeah, he's dead. But yeah,
did anything like stick out to you? Guys with machine guns, but I don't know, any landmarks or anything just noteworthy?
yeah, what was it? The house.
Like, well, there was a boat that pulled up.
I eventually asked him about Trump's role, which is kind of why
Yeah.
I mentioned this.
Why you brought it up? Yeah.
Come on
There
in,
was a
Julie.
boat that pulled up, and it was like obvious that like people were there meeting them, and then there was someone driving around in a golf cart. So definitely.
With machine guns standing there.
Really?
Wow.
Do you think it was like the government in control or some other?
I think it might be the government maybe took it over, and they're using it for their own personal gain as usual.
So, what did you make of it when you heard that the FBI director and the attorney general under Trump put out that message saying, look, everybody, there's no list of prominent people. Just so people know, I didn't really push like I admittedly extremely peculiar and reviled sort of angle on this story. I just kind of wanted to just survey people.
Your information gathering.
Yeah. Just because I'm interested in how people sort of like acquire and synthesize information around various sort of major news stories. So people who got caught up with Epstein, nobody's being blackmailed. Forget about it. What was your reaction?
My reaction would be someone that would talk about that to those specifics are guilty of it.
Huh?
Expand. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, they're talking about there's no list, which there is. There's nothing that happened on Epstein Island, which there was. His suicide was an accident, or not an accident, suicide, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's still roaming around. I don't think he's dead.
So you think these people in the Trump's administration are now in on it?
Well, if they're on the list, they sure are. Yeah, definitely.
And how about Trump himself? Like, he seems to like be making crazy statements about it. He's criticizing his own supporters. He's saying it's a hoax. Like, what's going on with that?
I kind of really didn't pay any attention to that because this is like actually the first I'm hearing of this because I kind of died off of all that crap. I'm just trying to enjoy life,
Which is
Hear, hear.
wild.
Yeah.
Which is so wild
But
that you
again,
have
the
this.
Inquirer gets in the way, and you got
Position.
But wait.
Like,
You're
yeah.
gonna get the kicker in a minute.
Okay.
all these celebrities and politicians and pedophilia rings and all that other crap. So, Pizzagate.
So Pizzagate, you're familiar with that as well. So he's a guy who knows enough about this subject, this like general range of subjects to be familiar with Pizzagate.
To know
But
Pizzagate.
He
which
hasn't
is
looked
much-
into whether
Trump's statements on
Yeah.
the thing he cares about. Yeah. And he went to the fucking island. Like, this is so insane to me. Like, he went to the island specifically because of the interest in this story. He knows about Pizzagate, which means like he's, I'm sure, well aware of like the QAnon, adrenochronium, all that stuff. And so that would seem to imply a level of knowledge that a person of this disposition would also be aware of Trump's most recent statements on it. So do you believe him when he says he doesn't know about it? And it just doesn't ring as true or plausible.
I think there's some cognitive dissonance. I don't know that he's overtly lying, which is why I tend to hedge on the whole accusation that people are lying. Yeah. And in fairness to him, I'm not sure that he specifically went to the Virgin Islands to tour Epstein's
island. Do the tour on purpose.
I think they might have. I think they were on. I mean, my sense was that they just were vacationing in the Virgin Islands and took a tour, and maybe like being able to see Epstein's Island was like an added benefit. Yeah.
So with it all, and your basic understanding is that stuff is generally true.
I would think so. They're not making all that up. I mean, you can't make shit like that up. Yeah. You know what I mean?
There is some stuff you can't make up. Do you consider yourself Republican, Democrat, Independent?
I'm going to stay away from that question.
Fair enough. So, Andrew.
Okay, so yeah, there's a bunch like that.
Yeah.
This lady here was really good. I used that as the thumbnail. And this guy, Bob, was like generally one of the most hilarious people I've ever encountered in my life. Was naturally hilarious. So if people want to see the rest of it, go to my
go check it out on his
or
YouTube.
go to my Twitter feed, and I've linked to it. So
appreciate that. But how does that fit into your assessment? Because I'm sure you don't think that you have your own cognitive dissonance to explain.
No,
so explain the Trump thing.
If I do have cognitive dissonance, I invite people to
inform
me about it. Yeah, identify it. Well, I mean, the Trump thing, I don't think it's that inexplicable, really. I think he was always pretty non-committal whenever he was personally asked about this during the campaign. It's not like he ever brought up this issue on his own volition.
Agreed.
Unlike others in his orbit and later like administration.
And Bongino and all these other people did bring it up. I agree with your assessment so far.
I think that even dating back to 2019, he made statements on this matter that raised eyebrows, but given his personal involvement, makes sense, which is that he definitely was skeptical that Maxwell was guilty of the rampant child sex.
He says, I wish her well.
He says something like, let them prove it if they're claiming she did this, in the Axios interview from 2020 with I forget the guy's name now. And
so I
just don't think
he's been consistent. For me,
I just don't think that I don't think he buys a lot of like the premise of what's going on here, probably justifiably. And I'm not defending him in the sense that I think. Okay, let me sort of
wait a second, Mike. He says Obama made the files that they're made by the Democrats.
Exactly. Well, no, true. That's clearly BS. He's trying to conflate anything related to the Epstein files with Russiagate, with a lot of other stuff. We would disagree maybe on Russiagate, but I think there was hijinks, to say the least, in terms of how Russiagate was handled, and like some, let's say, stuff that was kind of manufactured to impugn or
to the audience. The reason I'm not pushing back is we have to get into the actual weeds of the Trump stuff real quick.
Yeah.
So I think, time, but I do disagree with that. Just basically.
So when people ask, like, well, okay, what is Trump doing? Like, why is he saying it's a hoax? Well, I think because everybody should now know that he had a lengthy relationship with Epstein. That's not deniable. I think it's silly for him to act like it could be deniable, or to put on a public performance such that it appears as though he's trying to deny the closeness of their one-time relationship. I mean,
it's suspicious that he's lying by your own lights, or at least he's a fabulist with respect to the extension of Obama.
But he denies.
That's suspicious.
I don't find it suspicious in that it makes me suspect that he's complicit or trying to cover up a child sex trafficking ring. I think that he's trying to stifle the publicization of materials that may be embarrassing to him, in that anybody who has any connection at all to Epstein now is going to be embarrassed if that connection is made public in any way. So even if it's like innocuous in the sense that it in no way implicates that person in any illicit conduct, just the mere fact of it coming out is a huge headache for them. And not only on the political level, but also potentially because it could expose them to litigation, because these litigants, as I think we've kind of established, are nothing if not incredibly aggressive and creative in terms of who they can try to
as Trump is himself, but
sure.
But you put that, like, he must have, or unless you think he's just totally rational, and maybe I don't necessarily buy that Trump is a perfectly rational actor. I'm sure I don't agree that Trump is a perfectly rational actor. I think oftentimes he is motivated by things that are just either his ego or impulse, and so I don't necessarily think that he's perfectly rational. But if all he's worried about is something like this birthday letter where he's like, enigmas never age and may every day be another wonderful secret, like, do you think that's the kind of thing he's worried about coming out, such that he would do this whole repertoire? I mean, that to me seems like
there could be more than that.
A miscalculation. It feels like such a blatant, and so I'm not saying he's not prone to miscalculations, but it just seems like any like reasonably advised person, like, okay, so this is this letter, and I even heard you say it on the Spaces, where it's like, what does this letter prove? Like, is it a smoking gun or anything? It's a weird letter. I make fun of it and shit. It's not a smoking gun, like I say, for anything. But if that's what he's worried about, wouldn't he just release the files and stuff?
I think the approach being taken here that he's taken is like counterproductive, just from the standpoint of his own interest, because he's ensuring that the clamor around this stuff is not going to be tamped down. He's ensuring the interest in it will continue. I mean, he was asked about it yet again today when he was in Scotland, and he went on he explained his he gave what seemed to be a new explanation for how he ended his relationship with Epstein, which is that not that Trump saw that there's something inappropriate going on between Epstein and younger girls potentially,
which is alleged,
which some people try to allege, but that Epstein was apparently poaching Mar-a-Lago staff, which is a lot less noble sounding than how some of his supporters tried to frame why it is that he had this falling out purportedly with Epstein. And it's just going to keep going on and on and on. And given that drip, if stuff continues, I mean, we know if you go read the transcripts of the Maxwell trial. Have you read any of them?
I've read reporting on the trial. I have not read the transcripts.
Well, I would recommend reading at least some of the transcripts, because as you could imagine, I think reading the primary source material is a lot different than reading how stuff is characterized secondhand. And there are plenty of references to Trump in the Maxwell trial.
Sure.
So is it therefore plausible that there's documentary records or other evidence that the government has in its possession that would prove as the foundation for why it is that Trump would be raised in the trial, even if only in a peripheral way, meaning not trying to implicate him for anything necessarily? But yeah, I mean, Virginia Giuffre,
what would that
story
be?
Is that she worked there is what would what be? Well, maybe he wrote a birthday note. Or
that's what I mean.
Michael Wolff. I mean, Michael Wolff claims that Epstein showed him Polaroids that Epstein had in a safe, featuring Trump kind of cavorting with naked young women or naked
with
girls.
a stain on his pants, and right?
Do we know those? Yeah, do we know those girls were minors? No, but we do know that Epstein and Trump obviously shared an affinity for young models. That's how Trump had Melania. And none of doesn't mean that there was anything, a pedophilic sex trafficking ring going on. But Trump, his MO is to deny, say everything that could be inconvenient for him or embarrassing him to him is just a fake. And he does this with any issue. Everything is fake news. So I don't know. Trump's approach here just doesn't strike me as that unusual.
You don't think he had sex with a 17-year-old? You don't think he had sex with a 17-year-old without knowing it? That is ringing you as the kind of thing. And by the way, I think it would make sense, but potentially, I'm not saying I know this to be true, but for example, the government could interpret the non-prosecution agreement to apply to Trump, or Pam Bondi could interpret that and say something like, well, it says, it doesn't apply to potential co-conspirators, and therefore, Trump is not implicated in any of this stuff, so there's no predicate for an investigation. So they would be fulfilling with their memorandum. And Trump didn't know about it, so we're not going to investigate further. But is that the kind of thing that you think it just does not sound plausible to you, that Trump would have sex with a 17-year-old unwittingly?
I mean, look, I guess anything is possible. I don't find it to be. I mean, but let's say Trump did have sex with a 17-year-old, which, by the way, not to be an age of consent guy, because it's truly not an issue that I'm otherwise that focused on. But it did become a relevant in like the Maxwell trial, for instance, where they had to, you know, deal with the fact that the age of consent in New York is 17. It's 18 in Florida. It just differs.
Mhm.
So like, so I don't know. I mean, let's say Trump did have sex with a 17-year-old unknowingly, or maybe even knowingly, because it would have been above the age of consent. Not that I would advise that behavior, people.
Mhm.
So I know everybody's going to like rush to misconstrue maliciously everything I say on this. Like, what would that prove that there was like pedophilic sex trafficking conspiracies that like now like God,
No, but it would
determine
vindicate
how
the libs. It would vindicate the libs that Trump has
Maybe.
something to hide.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump has stuff to hide because there probably are more materials that are in government repositories somewhere that reflect
Sick. So you don't have a problem with me being a reply guy to JD Vance and saying, "What about the Epstein files?" If I,
No,
if you,
I don't.
okay, perfect.
Let's keep it going. I'm
all right. Hell
it.
yeah. And
I
I'm
mean, I
Bannon
think
on
it's
that point
insane.
too.
I think it's insane that JD Vance was protested today by people screaming that he was covering for pedophiles. I think that's just like mass psychosis, mass delusion, which again is part of the reason why I have a problem with how this thing has developed, because there is like a mass hysteria that's been just stimulated here that nobody thinks that there's any reason to like even tentatively like refute in any way. They just let it flourish. Which I think is absurd.
Well, I'm glad that we at least agree that we want more transparency. And in general, I don't think there's anything wrong with Democrats taking a line. I don't think the Democrats should be asserting as fact that we know that this mainstream narrative is true. And I try to be careful and calibrated about how I kind of troll about this, where it's more in the form of questions, or it's presenting them like through their lens. So, for example, I was on Tim Pool this weekend, having a debate with Gavin McInnes and Tim Pool, and the sort of topic was, is Trump winning? And I pressed them on the Epstein stuff on their own terms. I don't think there's anything wrong or inconsistent, or that I'm playing into this conspiratorial myth by using their frame of reference to score political points, or to push for more transparency where there could be something weird or embarrassing for the president here. Again, using their own standards. And yeah, I don't hear you'd have a problem with that.
I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with pressing them from within the
as an internal critique.
confines. Yeah, in terms of testing their internal consistency on what they have purported to believe. But like, for instance, with Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, who have co-sponsored the potential discharge petition to call for the release of Epstein files, I don't have anything against that on principle. In fact, I'm in favor, again, of maximum disclosure. But I do find that the way they've discussed this issue is suggestive of some of this credulity or just kind of like lazy acceptance of the assumptions that have not like been, that they've never bothered to like critically examine, that I find it a little bit worrying that they just give, again, sort of unthinking license to or credibility to, even as much as I might support, on principle, the disclosure of maximum.
But that's why I think Mike Johnson's behavior is even potentially more perplexing. I mean, Mike Johnson clearly, to pause and you agree, he's pausing, the business of the House specifically because of this, specifically because of, I guess, embarrassment to the president. I'm not hearing you to argue otherwise. He must have a reason to do that. I mean, do you think that I think explicitly he's saying to give the administration some breathing room on that. So I'm sussed out by this whole thing. I'm sussed out by their response to this. I think it's bizarre, except unless in the circumstance that Trump has something to hide.
I agree. Look, I mean, I think it's totally bizarre that, as the New York Times reported last week, the DOJ redirected hundreds of FBI agents and prosecutors to just shelve their ordinary duties and just 24/7 pouring through Epstein files, and then flag stuff that referenced Trump, but also other prominent individuals like Bill Clinton or whoever. So it wasn't limited to Trump there. But I think that is bizarre. Like, why? Like, shouldn't they be solving crime or something? Like, why are they doing that? So I mean, that is this has become like a comedy of errors in a lot of ways. And so I just think that there are much more, unfortunately to a lot of people, probably banal and explicable reasons why this has happened than that Trump is covering up child sex trafficking rings and is like a pedo protector, or any of these theories that people seem to like believe as a matter of like strident religious faith, which I understand you don't quite believe that, but
Yeah, no.
you would agree that that belief is extremely widespread,
Yes.
definitely on the internet and probably in the comment section as we speak.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, with the characterization. And I've tried to be careful. My video editors put cover up in some of the titles of the Epstein. I did like a couple of Epstein videos, or were basically just edits of my stream. But in general, I have been very careful, I think, to say that I don't know that there's any proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or even proof with the preponderance of evidence, really, that any of this kind of mainstream narrative, and I do think that is the mainstream narrative, or at least the conspiratorial narrative, is at all substantiated. And so on that basis, I think there's some agreement. As we're closing up, I want to ask you some questions about predictions. The first one I want to ask is, do you think that Trump is going to pardon Maxwell? And if he does, do you think that MAGA will forgive him? Because as of now, people talk about there's this big revolt, and I agree, there have been big grumblings about how Trump has handled this, but a lot of this is like shooing off blame to Bondi and underlings. You haven't really seen a mass exodus of loyal MAGA in terms of the polling from Trump. So they're grumbling, they're angry about stuff, but they're not necessarily leaving him. Do you think that A, that he's going to pardon, and B, if he does, that they'll abandon him finally? We'll finally get to that stage.
Well, I think the media, and by that I mean both traditional, quote unquote, mainstream media, but also alternative media, social media, they're all obsessed with positing some great rift or divide or turmoil within MAGA. It's always like, oh, is the MAGA base going to abandon Trump? They tried this. Yeah, they tried this around.
Same names, Cenk Uygur, yes.
That's not even who I was necessarily thinking of, but
Okay.
I'm sure he did it as well. And I worked with him at one point, believe it or not, many years ago. And different.
I still like Cenk. I still like him. We have disagreements, but I like him.
Yeah, I mean, I get along with him fine on a personal level, but during the Iran Israel situation, I think there was basically a narrative that was concocted that because on social media, on X in particular, the algorithm curates to us people that seem to be representative of some kind of divide
Jack
within MAGA.
Posobiec, Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, but
these
even
people,
Posobiec was like, but even I mean, Posobiec and Kirk are almost in a different category because they're just government functionaries.
Yeah, sure.
And they admit that they get like they coordinate
marching orders
with
from the White House,
exactly.
yeah.
They literally get literal marching orders. But others, even Dave Smith, who I don't think is getting marching orders, but supported Trump despite being like an anti-establishment libertarian and stuff. And then once Israel started bombing Iran, and then when the U.S. then definitely when the U.S. joined in, like he was calling for Trump's impeachment, etc. Despite having supported for him and quasi debated me at the time as to why I didn't think that particularly made much sense. And then
that's the other thing, by the way, I want to give you your flowers for is this notion, and I think you and Kyle Klinsky agree on this, that Trump was always this kind of dove on foreign policy intervention, which is
I never argued that. I mean, I think the debate around that, the perception of that, were much different for the 2024 campaign and the 2020 campaign than the 2016 campaign. Because in 2016, Trump didn't have a track record. He didn't have,
right.
He's never president. So like you had to like maybe draw certain inferences or project certain possibilities based on like just patterns or like his basically being a pundit. But I thought like that whole depiction of Trump became radically
bizarre and
untenable
wild,
by 2024 when we have 4 years worth of data and also 4 years worth of his activities as
and statements,
the number one, like
I
said, the most politically dominant person in the Republican Party in the post-presidential period. And I thought, and him saying, "Oh, I can end the Ukraine war in 24 hours," or "Wouldn't it be nice for Israel to wrap things up in Gaza," or any of these other claims were silly. And also, he did, on the other hand, actually call for Israel to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities during the campaign, but it just didn't get covered. It just didn't get covered. But anyway, the point is that there were these claims made, like narratives were trying to be like reified, that there was this major split within MAGA, like the New York Times was writing about it. And if you look at it, like, they're basically covering like a handful of podcasters. I mean, it makes no sense in terms of the broad Republican electoral coalition who actually do constitute the MAGA base. And I actually, a few weeks ago on the 4th of July, actually we did a similar thing that we did last weekend, which is we went to the 4th of July parade, Staten Island, like ground zero of like Trump supporters in the New York tri-state area.
Yeah,
And not a single one of them failed to support enthusiastically Trump bombing Iran, and had like no relation to these like online figures who people want to set up as like emblematic of the MAGA base, and then like use it as a basis of some narrative when they have maybe some consternation with Trump. I think the Epstein thing might be a little different on a certain level, because like fervently believing that there's a child sex trafficking ring, and it's also demonic and also like undermining Christian values, and like explains how like power is distributed in society. Like that's kind of a
core member of that conspiracy who's in on all that stuff. If anything, I say this, but I ultimately think they wouldn't abandon him if he does pardon her. And I'm curious your take. If anything should break this coalition up, it would be something like that. But I don't think it will if he does.
I don't think it will. I mean, what do people mean by break it up? I mean, there would have to be a poll that comes out. Like, what percentage of Republicans would no longer be supporting Trump in the event that happened? I can't 20%. Imagine it would ever dip below 80. I can't imagine it would ever dip below like 80% at most in terms of the Republicans who do continue to support Trump. So I
tend to agree with that. Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
For virtually any, unless he like, I don't know, like murders a baby on live television, but even then, I don't know that it's a given.
And do you think he'll actually do it? Was the other part of the question?
Well, I mean, I don't know if he'll do it. I don't know. I would love to know more information about what Todd Blanche was doing for those 2 days when he was talking to Maxwell.
It seems weird.
I would love to see it. Where's the transcript, Todd? I mean, I would love to see that. I mean, I do think it would be fruitful for Ghislaine Maxwell to testify publicly. Why not? Everybody claims they want disclosure, right? So if there has to be some clemency offered in exchange for some testimony, I don't see what the problem is. She's already served over 5 years in prison, and it's her tenure of imprisonment is already an outlier if you compare it to what others might get for a comparable offense. And I think she was already way over sentenced because of like a political climate at the time, and because of like we've gone over my views as to the evidentiary problems with the trial. So I think it would be more than warranted to offer her some degree of clemency at this point. Is it have to be a full-fledged pardon? I'm not sure. It could be a commutation or something else. I mean, but if there has to be something done, and I just don't like what do you or I or anyone gain from her remaining in prison in Tallahassee rather than being enabled to, from soup to nuts, give us the full story of her dealings with Epstein? I mean, why not, right? I mean, I'm sure you would tune in. I know I would.
I would certainly tune in. I think what the worry of the left and the Democrats is, oh, well, they're just doing this crooked deal. That speak about what the government thinks, or the people who are fabulous. The government represented that she can't be trusted, that she's a liar, serial liar. So I think that people are concerned.
When did they represent that?
That in the trial, right? That's about what I get from reporting. I haven't read the transcript of the trial.
Well, she was initially indicted also for perjury, but then the government never even took that to
separate from whether or not the government is represented, that you can't trust her and you can't trust basically if she's a liar. Are you denying that the government has said that Maxwell's a liar?
Well, they have by way of them initially charging her with perjury, but then
separate and apart from the perjury charge.
I mean, like when have they said that exactly?
Okay, I'll look into it and I'll pull it up. And if I'm wrong about that,
I mean, they may have. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, we'll look into it. But if it's the case that they've accused her of being a liar, and you agree, even if she wasn't formally accused or informally accused of being a liar by the government, she definitely has an interest, given that Trump is the one with the pardon power, or at least some control over the prosecution here, to the extent that they would be getting any sort of deference from in the criminal justice system, that there's a obvious potential bias there. And I think that's one of the concerns from the Democrats.
Sure. I'm sure she has a bias in favor of getting out of prison.
Yeah. But in this case, that means appeasing Trump. Necessarily.
I don't know. I mean, like we would have to know more about what was potentially offered, or if that would affect her testimony. I don't know. So what would the idea is that she's going to, if she publicly testified, she would falsely claim that Trump is exonerated and then implicate Trump's enemies.
I mean,
I
you
don't
seem
know.
to think that women can do that. Sorry, that's a cheap shot. No, I'm just listen. I appreciate it.
No, no, absolutely. I believe all women. I take
You
offense
believe all
to
women? No, I want to give you the last word.
I mean, either way, even if
yeah,
there could be some corruption deal, I mean, I would still, all
want to
other
see
things
it.
being
Yes, of
equal,
course.
want to hear from her.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Me too. But I'm just saying I'm skeptical of like secret negotiations between this administration, who I think in other instances, for example, with the Mayor Adams, what I take to be a very corrupt deal, to drop that case in exchange for favors on immigration. I don't trust this Department of Justice to tell you the truth. And so, I'm just generally very skeptical. I think you can understand as a Democrat, we don't take as gospel, and nor I think that you would expect us to, like the goings on in the Department of Justice under Trump. I just, we don't trust them, and we think that they're liars. But I do want to give you the last word here. I really appreciate you being a good sport and coming on. I know that chatters, you have a lot of disagreements with Michael. I encourage you to, we'll put this in an edit and we'll put a video, voice those comments in the chat. My challenge for you is try to be as specific as possible. So I'm less than interested in hearing like the kind of just invective, which is unattached to specific critiques. Not that you can't make specific critiques. Like I said, one more question before I give you the last word. Is this the most pushback that you've ever received for any one of your takes before?
I think it may be the pushback in which the online response is so across ideologically negative. I think the volume and the intensity of other instances of pushback might have been greater.
Okay.
Like 2020 George Floyd stuff, that was a lot of big consternation. Even like 2016 election stuff, Russiagate was much more protracted. I think the MAGA people were probably even more incensed after the 2020 election, when I was kind of countering some of their claims. And Ukraine, I was like one public enemy number. I was like among the top targets of like the NAFO trolling organization, which you may or may not have been.
Were you on the kill? I'm not NAFO. Wait, I don't know what NAFO is, and I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, it was basically,
all I know about NAFO is dogs, but I'm not a part of any NAFO. Okay.
It was like organized trolling. I mean, they went after me pretty viciously. I think. So I don't know that the sheer volume and intensity of the pushback is necessarily the biggest ever here, but the unanimity on like a cross ideological basis is sort of unique.
No, I appreciate that. It's a unique aspect of it, because typically your previous, I think there are incentives in this specific case.
Like, there's no big constituency out there of people who seemingly
that
seem like they sympathize with me around
Yeah. No. So I appreciate it. It's a little bit lonely, and your allies here are also maligned.
Okay.
Ben Shapiro and Dershowitz and these people. It's a small community.
I don't know that I would fully agree with everything that Ben Shapiro says, but it was enough where we could have like a gainful 30-minute discussion.
Sure, and I think it's a good discussion as well, and I think you guys should listen to it. But no, let me give you the last word. I would love at some point, in the future, we should touch back if these like Russiagate claims end up in any indictments or anything. I would love to have a conversation at some point about Russiagate. But in general, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me. And give us your final take, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to doubt there'll be any Russiagate indictments, but we don't have to get into that right now. But I would still talk about it. Yeah, so go to mtracy.net. I've done a bunch of articles, for better or worse, recently on Epstein stuff. I just posted that also in article, sort of quasi-article form, that video that we were playing as parts of before. So for like maybe the 1% of you out there who are not sputtering with rage at me, and you think maybe there's some noteworthy information to be found, here's a guarantee. If you read the article that I published on Saturday, entitled something like the insane misconceptions around the Epstein case, I can guarantee you will learn new information that has not been reported elsewhere, not because I'm some necessarily intrepid investigative journalist on this particular story, but because I've read through like the several hundred pages of reports on things and fished out stuff that I doubt you have been made aware of, and I think will affect your perceptions on some level of the case. So take a look at that. And yeah, I'm Tracy on Twitter /X. I'm Tracy on YouTube, whatever. That's about it.
Thank you so much, Michael. And yeah, talk soon.
All right, take care.
Peace out. Okay, how do I leave? Oh, there we go. There we go.
All right.